Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al-Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. As mystery swirls around the cause of the Azerbaijan Airlines crash, reports now blame Russia's defense system for the deadly incident in Kazakhstan, which killed 38 people. Syria's new authorities say supporters of ousted President Bashar al-Assad have killed 14 policemen in what has been described as an ambush in the west of the country. To the war in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is being accused of sabotaging the ceasefire that would lead to the release of hostages. The Azerbaijan Airlines plane that crashed in Kazakhstan, killing 38 people, was downed by a Russian air defense system, according to a preliminary investigation. The Kremlin says it would be wrong to speculate before the end of the investigation into the cause of the crash. The passenger jet was en route from Azerbaijan's capital to the city of Grozny in Chechnya, but was diverted after several failed attempts to land due to heavy fog. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova, who is in Moscow for us this evening. Dasha, good evening to you. Russia is warning against hypotheses after the airline crash, but what has the prelim investigation revealed?
Well, indeed, what we understand Moscow is saying is that the final outcomes of this investigation have to be provided before any hypotheses with regards to what has caused this plane to crash are made. However, what we understand is at this stage there is no clarity and there are no versions as to what might have happened and what might have caused this plane to fall down. What we have heard from Russia's aviation authorities, Rosaviatsia, earlier was the very fact that this plane could have hit the birds and that could have resulted in the outcome we have seen. However, what we have heard from the Kazakh authorities was that this plane has attempted to land twice in the city of Aktau, but they were constantly changing chaotically the altitude at which they were flying. We also understand that the airport in Aktau has been ready to admit this passenger plane, but again, it was for some reason difficult for these crew to land this plane there. We also understand from the Kazakh authorities that there is so far no official version of what has happened and the expertises are being conducted. There are several ones. We're also hearing that the law enforcement agencies from both Russia and Azerbaijan will be allowed to see the results of these probe. And interestingly, there has been lots of speculation, obviously, with regards to the possibility of this plane being hit by the Russian air defense systems. With regard to that, we are looking at the timing. The timing has coincided with the drone attack against Russia's North Caucasus republics, and some of the aviation experts have been pointing to the fact that the plane has diverted. It has tried to, they say, land in Russia, but it couldn't because Russia is using several layers air defense system, which has electronic warfare, which jams the systems of a plane, and the missiles that are being fired at the targets in the sky. So they suggest that the plane might have been experiencing some troubles with the command systems because of this electronic warfare before it has diverted to another side of the Caspian Sea to the Kazakhstan territory.
Dasha, as you explained there, we're waiting for those investigations to be carried out. But the Azerbaijani government officials made the claims around a Russian missile being responsible for the crash. We've heard that. Has Russia responded to any of these latest accusations at all?
Well, no response to this moment. Again, we are waiting for the official results of this investigation, and this is exactly what the Russian authorities will be looking for. But at the same time, if you read into what the political analysts here in Russia are saying, and they are saying now very clearly that at this stage it does seem that the international community would be trying to put the blame on Russia, because they say it will be yet another incident as MH17 or Bucha in which Russia will be blamed, and Ukraine. Russia will be saying that they are waiting for the results of the probe before making and drawing any sort of conclusions. And this is what political analysts here are saying is actually dangerous for the situation at this stage, because they say that the time is of essence, and we have been at the stage where the possibility of a negotiated settlement to the conflict in Ukraine has been in the air. There have been conversations about the possibility of ceasefire or the possibility of a meeting between Russia and the United States on this conflict with the arrival of the new U.S. administration in January. So that could be also playing into the sequence of the events. But again, what Moscow has suggested to this moment is that the results of the investigation have to be provided, and we have heard that 2 black boxes have been recovered from the scene of the crash, and obviously the data from them will be shedding the light into what has happened.
Thank you so much. That's our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Earlier today, Baku Airport shared images of staff and passengers observing a minute's silence, with people laying flowers in memories of the 38 victims of the plane crash. Let's turn our focus to Syria now. Angry protests have erupted in the central city of Homs following a video showing an attack on the Alawite shrine. The video was later confirmed to be old by Syria's new Minister of Information. The minister reaffirmed the government's commitment to protecting all religious and historical sites and accused unnamed parties of attempting to stir internal strife in Syria. In Syria, Bashar al-Assad is out, but his loyalists do remain. Syria's new government has vowed to pursue the remnants of the ousted Bashar al-Assad regime, who are accused of an attack which killed 14 police officers yesterday. The violence in Tartus, home to many Assad supporters, marks the deadliest attack on the new authorities to date. Elsewhere, Al-Arabiya's camera did capture the moment military convoys from the new Syrian government entered Latakia, arriving from Idlib to restore security. Now, in northeast Syria, there were deadly clashes between the Syrian Democratic Forces and the armed factions backed by Turkey yesterday. The factions attacked advanced positions of the SDF, leading to the killing of about 30 people from both sides. Meanwhile, in the north of the country, both the SDF and the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army claim to be in control of the Tishrin Dam following heavy fighting over the past few days. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Omer Ozkizilcik, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Alawite communities have been protesting in several Syrian cities. What do we know about the reasons behind this recent unrest?
So what we have seen so far is that we can basically divide the protests into two. One are former regime supporters who have came out and to protest and to signal that they are still there, that they have still political might in Syria, and that they want to exercise some political power in the new Syria. And then we have the other ones who are people who gathered in response to the manipulated news or fake news, even in some cases, that are being widely spread. So because we see that some elements within the former Assad regime apparatus, especially close to Iran, are trying to incite hatred between the Sunnis and the Alawites in Syria, still continuing after the ousting of the Bashar Assad regime. And there are some incidents, as you have stated recently, but these protests are only one part of all the picture. There are also a second part of protests who came out in support of the new government in Syria, in declaring unity for all Syrians and rejecting any kind of sectarian agenda. So there is an ongoing process. There will be some more turmoil because it's a changing movement. It will take some time to establish full stability and full security in Syria.
Do you think these protests show just how fragile the security situation is in the country at the moment? As you just alluded there, it's still very new. Things are still falling into place.
So what happened basically is Bashar Assad fled the country. With him, or parallel to him, many senior leaders fled, but many mid to upper level people from the Assad regime still remain in Syria, including several war criminals. We have seen today, for instance, that one of the torturers of the Setnaya prison and one other person who have recorded himself torturing civilians in Syria have been captured. And there are still ongoing security operations to capture and arrest these people because among the Syrians, there is a need for accountability. People want the criminals to be punished within the law. However, as the Assad regime said still remain, they put up a resistance. There are some sporadic clashes. They try to save their lives. They try to flee. They try to seek refuge and hide somewhere in the coastal regions in the mountains of Syria. But in the end, when they are being found, and we see that many Alawites cooperate with the security officials, they put up resistance. Then we have some clashes, and today we had several incidents in which there were clashes, but in the end either the wanted people were killed or they were arrested.
The former head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Mohsen Reza, today said the Syrian resistance will be revived in less than a year. Is this an indication of Iran's plans for Syria in the future?
Yes, definitely. As you have stated earlier, many of these protests that were organized, we know actually who these people are, while some watchers outside who did not follow Syria on a professional level may not know them. People who know Syria and have followed Syria professionally know that they had close relations with Iran. What we see is that not the pro-Russian, but the pro-Iranian elements of the Assad regime are still trying to incite some hatred, try to gather up some demonstrations, some protests, have some clashes, fighting, some resistance. And this indicates, and we have seen, for instance, that an Iranian Shia cleric had called the people to behead anyone who is trying to enter the regions of the Alawites. So Iran has not accepted this huge defeat in Syria, this huge collapse of the Iranian so-called axis of resistance, is Syria Crackdown. And Iran has not accepted the reality. So therefore, Iran is trying to incite hatred, to incite violence in Syria, and to weaken the new government in Syria. However, that being said, I do not think that the Iranian efforts will be able to destabilize Syria in the long run. I expect that within the coming months and weeks even, more security and more stability will be established in Syria because everyone, including the Alawites in Syria, have enough. No one wants any more war in Syria. The people want peace. They want to live normal lives, and they want to rebuild their country.
Thank you so much, Omer Ozkizilcik, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Appreciate your insights. Let's turn to the Middle East. The ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas is still stalled, with both sides blaming each other for the delay. Hamas is claiming that Israel has added new conditions, while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accuses the group of backing out of agreements. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is accused by unnamed sources of sabotaging the Gaza peace talks after reiterating his demand for the war to continue until Hamas is completely removed. The sources claim that it is hardline comments like these from Netanyahu and his defense minister that are delaying the ceasefire deal for hostage release. Israel's opposition leader is also weighing in, stating that Netanyahu is blocking the deal for political reasons. He added that whenever progress is made on the deal, Netanyahu speaks to foreign media, declaring that he won't stop the war. This comes as Defense Minister Israel Katz visited the Philadelphia corridor while wearing a bulletproof vest, stating that security in the corridor and throughout Gaza will remain under IDF control.
Security will remain in the hands of the IDF, which will be able to act in any way necessary to eliminate threats, prevent tunneling, disrupt terror infrastructure, and thwart terrorist organizations attempting to harm Israel or IDF soldiers. We will ensure that what we have seen regarding cross-border tunnels and other threats will not recur. We will ensure that security control remains in the hands of the IDF, which will act to eliminate threats.
Israel has launched a multi-wave attack across Yemen. The Israeli warplanes hit Sana'a International Airport, which is controlled by the Houthis. Sources in Yemen also reported strikes on the port city of Hudaydah and other energy facilities. Meanwhile, Al-Arabiya news sources have confirmed that Israel targeted Houthi headquarters in Sana'a. Israeli media reported that Tel Aviv informed Washington of the attack. For more on this, our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Trent Murray, joins us now. Trent, thanks for joining us. Israel has hit Houthi militants and infrastructure today. Can you share more details about the scale of the operation and what Israeli warplanes have targeted?
Yeah, that's right. They very quickly acknowledged that it was indeed IDF planes that hit those targets, putting out a fairly lengthy statement explaining that they were targeting what they said was Houthi infrastructure. Now, we know that Sana'a International Airport in the capital there was targeted. We also know energy facilities were targeted, as well as several key ports, including the main one of Hudaydah. Now, what the Israelis are saying is that they were targeting those particularly transport links because they say that Iran is using them to smuggle weapons into Yemen, including ballistic missiles, which the Houthi themselves have been firing towards Israel in fairly large numbers, I have to say, in recent days, which is why we had been expecting a fairly large-scale response was coming, and we certainly saw it today. We understand 3 people were killed, according to Houthi media, 17 injured, and also a very high-profile person happened to be at Sana'a International Airport when they struck. It was the Director General of the World Health Organization, of course, the UN's health body. He has tweeted that he is safe, but one member of his team was injured.
Defense Minister Israel Katz says that security in the Philadelphia corridor will remain in IDF hands. What is the significance of this area? And we're just switching focus here.
Well, it's a key crossing point between Gaza and Egypt. And so if the IDF continues to maintain control of the Philadelphia corridor, then what it effectively means is that the Palestinians in Gaza are cut off from any sort of access into the Egyptian side of their four-sided enclave. So it is significant. No surprise, I think, that Israel Katz has said that, because consistently the government here has been saying that they will maintain security in Gaza moving forward, even if there is a ceasefire agreement. I mean, we should note that Egypt does maintain that border on its side, but it is also heavily restricted, just like on the Israeli side. So I think a pretty significant show of strength, or a perceived show of strength, really, from the Israeli government sending the defence minister down there. But it will, I think, cause some concern, particularly in Egypt, that the IDF is maintaining this strong line, that they are going to maintain control of that key border crossing that separates Gaza and Egypt.
Trent, let's talk a little bit about these ceasefire negotiations that have been going on for a large amount of time in the background, in the shadow of this war. How is Benjamin Netanyahu's narrative playing into stalling any ceasefire agreements? He is saying that Hamas is changing the goalposts, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's really difficult to get a sense of where the ceasefire negotiations are at, because there is a lot of, I think, information warfare at play here. Both sides accusing the other of breaching the trust and putting in new conditions and whatnot into the negotiations. I mean, we do know that both sides are also, though, under pressure in their own ways. Hamas is under significant pressure, given the strong attacks by the Israeli army, but the Netanyahu government is also under pressure. You know, there's still around 100 Israelis that are being held in Gaza as hostages, and of course his government here is under a lot of pressure from families to get them home. So I think there is a desire, certainly on both sides, to potentially get a ceasefire here for their own respective reasons, but exactly how you get there is tricky, because it's very, very detailed. This is very high-stakes stuff, and, you know, it's often a bit of a game of smoke and mirrors, I think. There seems to be moments where there is some excitement that maybe a ceasefire is coming, and then, you know, in the hours and days later we learn it's all collapsed again. So very, very difficult. I imagine the return of President Trump to the White House, though, may have a pretty significant impact on the ground, just given how unorthodox and unpredictable he can be when it comes to Middle East policy.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Short break now, but when we're back, we'll take a look at how Christmas was celebrated around the world this year. And President Trump adds another nominee to his team, an ambassador to Panama, where he threatened to take back the canal.
At al-Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Let's turn to the US now, where President-elect Donald Trump has announced his pick for American ambassador to Panama, Cuban-born Commissioner Kevin Cabrera. This decision comes just days after Trump suggested that the United States should take control of the country's canal. Our correspondent, Benji Haya from Washington, has this report.
Pictured here on the right is Kevin Cabrera, the man Donald Trump wants on the ground in Panama, standing alongside his potential new boss. In announcing his selection, the president-elect said that few understand Latin American politics as well as Kevin, claiming the Central American nation is ripping off the United States. That allegation has been at the heart of Trump's narrative this week.
Because we're being ripped off at the Panama Canal like we're being ripped off everywhere else. A secure... He just said, take it back. And that's a good idea.
He's talking about this, the major waterway cutting through the American continent, allowing the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to converge. A huge transportation route for military and commercial vessels the world over. It was built by the US back in the early 1900s, but was handed over to Panama 25 years ago. Since then, fees to access the canal have risen, and it's increasingly being used by China.
But it's falling into the wrong hands. It was not given for the benefit of others by a token of cooperation, but it was given to Panama and to the people of Panama, but it has provisions. You got to treat us fairly, and they haven't treated us fairly. If the principles, both moral and legal, of this magnanimous gesture of giving are not followed, then we will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to the United States of America in full, quickly and without question.
Panama has hit back. Its president insists every metre of the canal belongs to his country. Its sovereignty and independence, he says, are non-negotiable. Neither is Greenland. The Prime Minister of the world's biggest island has told Donald Trump that the Danish territory is not for sale either, following the US President-elect's suggestion that he'd try to buy it for national security purposes. Trump isn't even in office yet, but these foreign policy feuds are already keeping Cabrera and co busy as America braces for another unconventional presidency. Benji Haya, al-Arabiya News, Washington.
In Trump's Christmas speech on social media, he once again slammed Panama on its operation of the canal, claiming that Chinese soldiers are illegally operating the waterway that the US built and also funded. Trump then floated the idea of adding Canada as the 51st US state, while criticizing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his high taxes. He also touched upon Greenland, which in his previous term he threatened to buy, and addressing its national security need for the US. Speaking of Christmas, we've seen how President-elect Donald Trump celebrates. He's been asking Santa Claus for the Panama Canal, Canada and Greenland. But now let's take a look at how Christmas was celebrated around other parts of the world this year. Let's begin in East Africa. Festivities are in full swing in Tanzania, where over 60% of the population identifies as Christian. In cities like Dar es Salaam, Christmas is marked by celebrations, church services and family gatherings. Al-Arabiya's Isaac Lukmando reports from the commercial capital.
How do Tanzanians celebrate Christmas? Because of the religious and cultural harmony, festivities in this neck of the woods are not reserved for just a section of the country's 62 million people. Families get together because it's a communal affair. They eat together, they play, and they exchange gifts. Many Christians go to church, while others choose to engage in acts of charity. Some donate food, clothing, or gifts to those in need. A 2020 survey found that 63% of Tanzania's population identifies as Christian. But Swahili culture, which unites Tanzanians and East Africans, has Arab, Persian, and Indian influences. Therefore, on Christmas Day, many people have things like pilau, which is spiced rice, grilled meat, and chapati, just to name a few. And like many other places in Africa, there is music and dance, with musical performances and festivities staged. But for others, it's a time to reflect, to take stock of one's year. It's a time to strategize on how to elevate incomes at personal and national level, to augment the overall well-being of the nation. Isaac Lukando, al-Arabiya News, Dar es Salaam.
Now over to Asia. While Christmas is not an official holiday in mainland China, that is not the case across the border in Hong Kong, where the Christian minority, along with many tourists, are embracing the holiday spirit. Our correspondent Laura Westbrook reports.
In his annual Christmas message, the head of the Catholic Diocese of Hong Kong, Cardinal Chow, pointed to challenges facing Hong Kong and the world, including the slower than expected economic recovery, worsening geopolitics and rising mental health problems among the youth and elderly. But he urged the city's 400,000 faithful to embrace the hope that Christmas brings. He also expressed a commitment to supporting marginalized communities who often feel unwanted and abandoned, including prisoners and young people. He added that justice is better not sought through vengeance, but through empathy. Here in Hong Kong, Christmas is a public holiday. Around 16% of the population are Christians, and churches across the city will host services. Across the border in mainland China, Christmas is not an official holiday. Around 5% of the population are Christians. Buddhism and Taoism are the major religions. Hong Kong's festive atmosphere is one of the draws of tourists, particularly those from the mainland. Some mainland tourists are choosing Hong Kong to immerse themselves in the city's holiday vibe. Government data estimates that there will be around 13 million trips made to the city during the Christmas and New Year period. The city is putting on a number of events, including a Christmas town, which has a 20-meter tall Christmas tree, and Christmas markets to draw in crowds. Hong Kong's famous skyline also transforms for the season, with Christmas-themed light displays illuminating skyscrapers. Laura Westbrook for Al Arabiya News, Hong Kong.
Now to a reminder of our top stories today. As mystery swirls around the cause of the Azerbaijan Airlines crash, reports now blame Russia's defense system for the deadly incident in Kazakhstan, which killed 38 people. Syria's new authorities say supporters of ousted President Bashar al-Assad have killed 14 people in what has been described as an ambush in the west of the country. To the war in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is being accused of sabotaging the ceasefire that would lead to the release of hostages. That's all from us on W News. Thank you so much for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night and thank you once again.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on al-Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello, I'm Riz Khan. Welcome to the show. The world is readjusting to the dramatic and sudden events in Syria this week. The end of the al-Assad regime marks a new chapter for Syrians at home and refugees overseas. And it also marks a potential realignment of the balance of power in the region and further afield. For all of these interested parties, the future of Syria presents both risks and opportunities. And that's what we'll tackle in this episode of the show. But Turkey is seen by many as the key player in negotiations over Syria's future. It's been host to 3 million Syrian migrants, and Ankara is keen to ensure that the fallout from the regime change doesn't result in the establishment of an autonomous Kurdish state near its border. I'm joined now by Cihat Yayce, who led the Turkish Navy until his demotion by President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in 2020. Admiral Yayce is now an author, academic and strategist. Admiral Yayce, it's good to have you on the show. Now, I've got to start by asking, what are Turkey's goals in Syria now that the Assad government has fallen?
Yeah, I thank you very much for having me. And, mainly, basically, Turkey has three priorities with respect to my mind. The first is to cleanse Syria of the terrorists, especially PKK, YPG, and SDF. And the second is the return of the Syrian refugees to their country. And lastly, to give the Syrian Turks a status that will guarantee their political and cultural rights. These are the main three priorities.
Now, Admiral, of course, it's recognized how important these developments are on Turkey's situation. And I wonder, what has been the impact of what's happened in Syria on President Erdogan's influence and status in the region?
So President Erdogan is the head of the Turkish Republic, and Turkish Republic is the most stable, secure, democratic, and westernized state in the region. So, and the only state in that region which is a NATO member. So that's why Turkey is very important state in that region, for the region, and also for the Western world, and also for the NATO alliance.
Admiral, there are some who suspect Turkey actively encouraged the opposition forces of the HTS along with the Syrian National Army in a limited military operation that would encourage President al-Assad to agree to a peaceful settlement that could then lead to the return of 3 million refugees from Syria. But in fact, it went further than expected and led to accidental regime change. Now, the Turkish government has denied any involvement. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I exactly believe that what the Turkish authorities says. Turkey has really supporting Syrian National Army and Syria's temporary government, so transition government, which are established and supported also by the role or the participation or the contribution of Turkish Republic. But HTS is a very different organization, and there is no involvement of Turkish Republic for that organization establishment or improvement or the operations or whatever it is. So Turkey is supporting Syrian National Army. And Syrian National Army has not involved in that operation or revolution directly.
Admiral, actually, a related question on this. Turkish-backed Syrian National Army forces have basically launched operations on territories held by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, which are backed by the US. And there have been reports that the Turkish Air Force conducting airstrikes in Syria's northeast. Is Turkey in the process of undertaking a major offensive?
First of all, I said before that the first priority of Turkish Republic is to cleanse terrorist organizations, especially PKK, YPG, from the borders of Turkey and indeed from Syria. And this is a long-run struggle, and it is a determinative. There is a determination of Turkish Republic for struggling that terrorist organization. It is not a Kurdish-led organization. It is a terrorist-led organization. Terrorist-led terrorist organization. And Turkish struggle has not begun with this, revolution. This is a long-run struggle, and this is just a continuation of that struggle. And indeed, by taking the opportunity of this revolution, terrorist PKK and YPG has been trying to get more lands in Syria. So Turkey has seen it. So that's why Turkey is taking the precautions for its national security.
Understood. Understood. Sir, Admiral, you've mentioned the United States' involvement, and I'm wondering, how do you expect this potential friction between two NATO members, Turkey and the US, to be resolved, and how might Donald Trump's presidency affect that relationship?
It doesn't, I think it doesn't matter who is the president of the United States, because United States is a state. So it doesn't matter who is the president, because the targets and the main policies of the United States will not change with respect to my opinion. So just there's slightly changes in their ways to obtain their targets. So that's why Trump had supported before Biden YPG, and also he also assigned a rank to the terrorist leader Mazlum Abdi as a general. So it doesn't matter who is the president of the United States, and it doesn't. So Turkish struggle against terrorism will not change with respect to who is the president of the United States.
But Admiral, you're both NATO members. That's really the heart of it.
Yeah. So, for example, Al-Qaeda or ISIS, how come they are the threats to the United States? How come? But we accept that if a nation, if a member of NATO has perceiving an organization as a terrorist organization with respect to its national security and the national interest, so as an alliance member, we accept it as a terrorist organization. So that's why I do not understand while Turkey accepting terrorist United States perception towards the organizations as a terrorist organization, whatever it is, but United States is not accepting, which is directly threat to Turkish national security. Those organizations, so they are not accepting as a terrorist organization. This is a contradiction with their NATO alliance.
Right. So Admiral, the divisions remain. Let me bring in one more factor here as we return to the look at Syria. Russian support for the al-Assad administration was a point of concern. How will the fall of the regime affect Turkey's relationship with Russia?
Oh, Russia, really, in reality, I do not believe that Russia has supported Assad regime. Russia took the advantage of the geopolitical position, geopolitical situation. And so Russia has behaved as an opportunist state. So Russia said that I'm gonna support you, but you have to give me some bases and some responsibilities in Syria. So they came to Syria and they took 2 bases, but never and honestly supported Assad regime, because I would like to hint that Israel, aircrafts, air forces have been bombing Syria for several years, but Russia hasn't shown any reluctance to Israeli planes. And also YPG, PKK, which is a terrorist organization supported by the United States and Israel, have occupied almost 1/3 of Syria. So, but Russia has not shown any reluctance.
Okay. Well, Admiral, with the regime change, things might change. So how would the loss of its air and naval bases affect Russia's influence in the region if that happens?
So we will see that. Will they lose or will they keep their bases over there? Because Russia doesn't show any reluctance to that revolution. Even Assad begged for help and support from Russia and Iran. They didn't give any support, real support. So I think there is a bargain between the states who has interest and involvement in that Syrian revolution. So we will see the result of the bargaining, and maybe those two bases will stay in Syria with respect to the bargaining.
Well, we have Iran, as you just mentioned, and that has effectively lost its land bridge to Lebanon for now, along with its influence in Syria. What kind of impact is this going to have on the Iranian-led axis of resistance, as it's called, and also on Iran's national security?
So, first of all, I do not see any Iranian national security issue in Syria, because no border. There is no border between Syria and Iran. So Iran's behavior to date has consistently opened space for Israel and provided justification for Israeli occupations. What I can say, really, it is even possible to say that Iran is a sacred partner of Israel. So I think that is an interesting perspective, Admiral. Now,
interestingly enough, also, the fall of the al-Assad government provoked an immediate response from many of the 6 million Syrian refugees around the world, half of which are in Turkey, wanting to return to their homeland. I know you feel strongly about the refugee situation. President Erdogan announced the opening of the border gate to manage the expected exodus. Do you think that is a welcome move, or is that premature while the country is still in transition?
Yeah, what I can say is there are millions of refugees in Turkey, and they have an impact on even inflation, on economic problems in Turkey, and even on the negative effect, very negative effect on the healthcare system of Turkey, and that the population of the refugees in Turkey is more than many European states' population. So there is a huge load on the Turkish Republic and Turkish nation. First of all, they have disrupted demographic structure of Turkey. So, therefore, I don't think there will be any negative aspects of Turkey in terms of their departure.
So, Admiral, just because we only have a couple of minutes left, I want to get your perspective on this. Who do you regard as the main winner from the downfall of the Assad regime?
Yeah, Israel and PKK YPG.
Simple as that. It's they're going to benefit the most.
Yeah, and indeed, United States.
We'll have to see. It's going to be an interesting time ahead. Admiral, I hope we get a chance to talk again. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Israel has reacted quickly to events in Syria with more than 100 airstrikes against military targets in the country. The Israeli government says it's destroying chemical weapons and military hardware to prevent it being used against Israelis by what it calls extremists. And Israeli forces have advanced from the occupied Golan Heights to set up a buffer zone to prevent an October the 7th style attack. I'm joined now by the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Ehud Olmert, thank you for joining the show, sir.
Hello.
Let me start by asking, what are the potential risks and opportunities for Israel from the events now taking place in Syria?
Well, certainly the event in Syria is dramatic, is historically significant. After so many years, the house of Assad, which started with his father, has been removed and was rejected completely. It was a result of a lot of corruption, I think, and these are the after effects of what took place in the last decade in Syria. The fact that Bashar al-Assad was personally responsible for the killing of 500,000 of his own citizens is something that was not forgotten or was not forgiven. And finally, it took years, but when the challenge came, there was no army and no one that was ready to fight for him. And that has collapsed. And the assistance of some superpowers, including Russia and Iran, was not sufficient, and they actually lost their holding position in Syria, which is perhaps the most significant outcome at this point. The fact that Syria is now controlled by some, I have to say, unknown elements. We don't really know all of them. We know some, something about them, but I don't think that we know enough about them. What is the strength? What is the power base? What are their plans? What are they going to do? The one thing which is obvious is that the Syrian army, which used to be a very serious military power, that was a threat to Israel from the north, has disappeared. The power base that was close to Hezbollah in the Lebanon, which was their supplier and their supporter, has disappeared, which is, of course, a significant weakening of the threat of Hezbollah as well. And so in these two ways, I think for Israel, this is a positive development. However, it's too early to judge what are the long-range consequences of the takeover by fundamentalist, extremist military force, and what may be the possible ramifications. I think it's too early. We have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that they have no access to serious weapons that might cause a serious damage.
I will touch on some of those points in a moment, sir. But that's the question everyone is asking, what comes next? And is there any real reason to suspect that an anti-Israeli extremist group might now form a new government?
Well, I think that that seems to be the most natural outcome. They are not friends of Israel. They are extremist, fundamentalist, ISIS by nature. I don't know if by affiliation, I don't exactly know who all of them are, but certainly there is no background of support, of acquiescence, of compromise with the state of Israel. So we have to suspect that they may become more extreme and maybe violent force that will be taking over Syria, and we have to be quite aware of it, quite careful, and watch it very carefully.
There is a lot of speculation, though, that the leader of the group, Ahmed al-Shara, or Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, as he's also known, is trying to distance himself a little bit from that. movement with a connection, at least with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and trying to win more approval from the international community so that he can be more like a government leader. And there is that strong feeling that perhaps there is a change in the way they might move forward.
Well, certainly we have to hope so, but I think we have to remain very careful. And look, at the present time, no one knows who is al-Jolani, and therefore there is not any immediate reaction by the traditional enemies of Israel, including the Iranians, that were tied up so much with Bashar al-Assad in his favor. So I think that what shows that he is smart is the fact that he is not rushing for any statements that might jeopardize the very initial hold that he has in Syria. But what will happen later, how he will build up his political power in Syria, and who will be the potential allies of a government, if he will form a government, remains to be seen. It's a very preliminary stage. And the experience in the Middle East proves that you have to be suspicious, you have to be careful, and don't rush for judgment either way. And don't do anything that will force him or squeeze him into a corner which will leave him with no alternative but to become an enemy of yours. If there is a chance that he will not, we certainly have to watch it carefully and see if it can somehow develop in a positive direction.
Now, as everyone knows, Mr. Omer, the Assad regime was in power for over half a century. And there has been some analysis, I would love to get your perspective on this, that Israel largely accepted the Assad regime in power because it was better to have the devil you know than the one you might not know. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Well, this is one of those sayings that, I sometimes say, I'd rather say that Assad was a dangerous enemy. I mean, mostly his father. But he also, the fact is that he was building an atomic reactor in Syria, which I had to order the Israeli army to destroy. But the fact that he was even contemplating a possession of nuclear power in Syria shows that he was dangerous, and he had to be taken care of very carefully, and as we did. But and also the fact is that he has aligned himself with Iran, and he allowed the Iranian forces to take important position inside Syria, which was an immediate threat to the security of the state of Israel. So he was not a friend, and he was dangerous, and there was a good reason for Israel to be apprehensive about him. But look, if at the end of the day, Iran, the ISIS forces will grow, expand rapidly, and take over and become very extreme and very violent and very provocative, as they threatened to be in the past, then definitely we'll be able to say, rather than have them, we should have stayed with Bashar al-Assad. But I think everything is too early. I'm not sorry to have lost the neighborhood of Bashar al-Assad, but I'm at the same time, I'm not extremely happy thinking about who potentially may take over.
As you indicated, Mr. Omer, Israel is concerned about the risk of any weapons that Syria possesses falling into the wrong hands or falling into the extremists' hands, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said. So Israel has taken action, of course, bombing military sites and so on, and also mobilizing troops into the Golan Heights. Isn't there the risk, though, that by bombing military sites in Syria, that Israel is damaging the new government's ability to maintain control and security within its borders?
No, I don't think so. Why should they? Where is the potential border risk to the border of Syria? Maybe I think we don't have to allow the new forces to become the controllers of the infrastructure or the military infrastructure, which has been part of the Syrian power for a very long time. So I think it's a good idea that as much as we can destroy the infrastructure, the research institutes where they were manufacturing missiles, long-range missiles, and other weapons, and the facilities where they were trying to build non-conventional weapons, chemical weapons, all these rather disappear as soon as possible. And there will not, we don't destroy, I believe so. I don't actually know everything, but I believe that we don't destroy the economic infrastructure of Syria. We don't destroy manufacturing facilities which are important for the economy of Syria. So that leaves the new leaders with enough basis to build up their hold in Syria and to contribute to the welfare of the states without the unnecessary military power base which Bashar al-Assad had for a long time.
So how do you see the balance of power in the region shifting as a result of the removal of the al-Assad regime?
Well, potentially I can say that the power of the more moderate forces, including, of course, Israel and the other moderate countries, the Arabs, has definitely been improved. I think it still remains to be seen what is exactly the game that Turkey is playing. I must say, I don't know. On the one hand, one shouldn't forget that Turkey is part of NATO. So there are certain restrictions and limitations to the ability of Turkey to use or to move all kinds of military actions which may not necessarily be acceptable to the alliance that Turkey is part of. On the other hand, it's obvious that Turkey probably triggered some of the operations and supported, directly or indirectly, the al-Jolani. So it remains to be seen where is Turkey in this game. Turkey is, as far as Israel is concerned, of course, is a source of some concern. We have to look at it.
We'll be looking at that on this show as well. So now, just we've got about 2 minutes left. I'm curious, considering what's going on in Israel right now with Benjamin Netanyahu going into court to appear on corruption charges, would you be comfortable commenting on that? I know you went through this, you denied all the accusations against you, but would you be comfortable commenting on what's going on with Mr. Netanyahu right now?
To tell you the truth, this is a legal process. What I was absolutely unhappy with was the fact that Netanyahu was using every possible manipulation, the power of his position, the power of the government in order to try and prevent a due legal process. But, and I think it's very important for the stability of the system in Israel and the nature of the Israeli democracy that it's taking place. What will be the outcome of this, I think, remains to be seen. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm not familiar with the specifics of the accusations. It smells. It sounds bad. It looks bad. The efforts that they were making in order to prevent his appearance in court almost speaks for itself. But we have to trust the legal system and let it work. And hopefully the truth will come through.
We've got, of course, a very divided country in Israel with people very much split on the whole perception of Benjamin Netanyahu. What impact would that have on the court proceedings, do you think?
Look, the fact is that in all the polls which were run in Israel over the last couple of years, particularly this last year, there was consistently a majority of people saying they don't trust Netanyahu, and they don't trust that in the course of the war on matters of the utmost sensitivity and importance for the national security of the state of Israel, that Netanyahu preferred there was a charge that he preferred his personal interest over the national interest of the state of Israel. And I think that the whole events now concerning his appearance in court and the efforts and the pressure that he was using against the legal system, the threats against the Attorney General, all this is somehow mixed up with the needs to take decisions about the ending of war. And therefore, I think that this is certainly contributing to the polarization which is going up in the state of Israel, and the expectation that somehow the legal process will bring about the collapse of the government.
Ehud Olmert, thank you very much. We're out of time, but thank you for your perspective. I look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well, what should we expect to see from a new government in Syria? Well, certainly the participation of the militia alliance Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, known as HTS, and Military Operations Administration, led by Ahmed al-Sharaa. For an understanding of the key groups who will be hoping to have a say in Syria's future, I'm joined by Aaron Weizelin, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Aaron, thank you very much for joining the show. Let me start by asking, how would you sum up the risks and the opportunities presented by the fall of the al-Assad government?
I think there's a lot of potential trajectories that could go. We could also see different events occurring more in the western part of the country than, say, in the eastern part of the country. For now, at least in the east, we've seen that there's more fighting between the Syrian National Army backed by Turkey against the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, and that could lead to potential destabilization. Important to remember that the Islamic State remains an insurgency in the east, as well as all the prisoners there. But in the western part of the country, in Damascus, we're seeing that HTS is already beginning to start its transitionary period in relation to meeting with former regime officials, handing it over to HTS's civilian government, the Salvation Government, and them announcing today that there will be a transition period now up until March 1st.
And Aaron, it seems that HTS is looking to be a little more governmental in its nature. What should we know about that opposition group, HTS, and its leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, in the potential new administration roles?
Yeah, so we have like a 7-year plus track record of now HTS governing through its civilian technocratic apparatus called the Syrian Salvation Government. Jawlani himself has had no official role within this government. So he's essentially like an unelected official that still makes the final decisions on many things. That being said, the Salvation Government has a series of ministries like any other government. It has the Majlis al-Shura, this consultative council. It's essentially, selected by a coterie of elite men within the society, and then they kind of decide on who the ministers are. And they've been governing like most any other governments, obviously with the certain limitations of not being an official government, recognized, as well as the fact that 3/4 of its population has been displaced people. So the UN has had a large role in assisting in the IDP camps. But, one of the things that they have been doing is building up these institutions, learning from lessons of crises such as COVID-19 or the earthquake in February 2023. And we've seen that at least during the offensive, before they took Damascus, that they were starting to implement the same governance structures in Aleppo as well. And therefore, I imagine that we'll see them trying to carbon copy this now in Damascus and elsewhere in the country.
I guess it should be noted, Aaron, that the group is considered a terrorist organization by the UN, Turkey, and many Western countries, many of whom have refugees wishing to return. Do you expect that status to change?
I think that it depends on the particular country. I don't think that there will be straight across the board same answer to it. I think that of all the countries that it might happen quickest, it might be Turkey. I think then some European countries, UK, might take some time, might want to, get something out of what's going on. But I think the United States in many ways will be the most strident, just because of their past being part of the Islamic State and al-Qaeda previously, as well as the fact that Jawlani was involved in war crimes, both in Iraq before he was the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, the predecessor to HTS, as well as within Syria itself. So I think it'll be different for all the different countries trying to potentially engage with this new government.
Well, of course, HTS is the main name being bandied around, but which are the other groups vying for influence in the future of Syria?
So we have HTS, which took over Damascus, more or less. You have the remnants of the old insurgency in the south, though it seems that they more or less will be letting HTS play the role, since even though the southern offensive was the first ones to get to Damascus, HTS is now beginning the transition. But then you have the Turkish-backed SNA, which continues to fight the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. But the thing with those two groups is that the SNA's main focus, because it is a Turkish proxy, is making sure that the Kurds are cut down to size, more or less, and don't have any potential influence going forward. And then, of course, because they're a minority in the country, while the SDF has a role to play, they wouldn't be ones that would be necessarily controlling the country. The question is what kind of deal they might get with HTS and how that would be integrated into the broader country. And then there are also questions related to the remnants of the old regime and how that all factors in. Thus far, there's been a peaceful transition. One of the biggest questions is if there might be some extremist elements from the old regime and the Alawite community that decide that maybe they're not happy with any new arrangements and therefore start an insurgency of their own. But that is yet to bear out, but it's something to potentially watch for in the more medium term.
We have an interesting situation in that Turkey and the US, both of which are NATO members, support different groups in Syria. How do you expect that to be resolved by the incoming President Donald Trump?
Well, it's been an issue between the two countries going back a decade ago, since the U.S. essentially backed the SDF in its fight against the Islamic State. It's important to remember that the only reason that the U.S. is backing the SDF is because of the global coalition's fight to take territory from the Islamic State and to make sure that it doesn't come back. And there have definitely been some uncomfortable conversations between Turkish and American officials going back a decade or so related to this, because it's important to remember that a core part of the SDF is the YPG, which is essentially the Syrian branch of the PKK, which is a designated terrorist group, not only by Turkey, but also by the United States. So it's a complicated problem. At the same time, I don't think anybody wants to see ethnic cleansing against the Kurds going forward. And the SDF has been controlling the prisons and IDP camps of the remnants of the Islamic State. So there are 10,000 male prisoners from the Islamic State that the SDF is holding, as well as tens of thousands of women and children related to the Islamic State still in its territory in northeast Syria. And of course, I don't think anybody wants to see that destabilized. Otherwise, you could kind of see the reemergence of the Islamic State, which of course the United States doesn't want.
Israel has been conducting airstrikes to take out the chance of weapons being used against it by extreme anti-Israeli groups. Now, what actual danger is there of that possibility?
I think in the near term, there's not a ton of danger related to it. It's more mitigating potential future risks. I think from a pragmatic level, HTS doesn't want to start a fight with Israel right now. Israel's kind of shown in the last year plus post the 10/7 attack in their response that it'd be a bit suicidal for HTS to start something right now. But I think Israel understands that given time from these past events, as well as space for HTS to potentially consolidate control, that maybe in 5 to 10 years, it could be an issue. And therefore, they're trying to get ahead of it. And because they have the freedom of movement now as a consequence of everything they've done over the last year or so, they're taking advantage of the situation to benefit their own security on the border.
Aaron, how is the balance of power, or how is the balance of power likely to change now in the region with regard to Israel and Iran?
Well, it's definitely been a big blow to Iran, not only in relation to Israel's response to the 10/7 attack and taking out a lot of Hamas's infrastructure, but also Hezbollah's infrastructure in Lebanon. And now with the falling of the Assad regime, this key cog between Tehran to Beirut has been stopped, and it will be a bit more difficult now for Iran to try and resupply and rebuild Hezbollah's capabilities in the aftermath of this alleged ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And therefore, the two countries in the region, at least, that have benefited the most geopolitically speaking are probably first Turkey and then second, possibly Israel.
Well, when we talk about balance of power, what about further afield, like Russia, for example?
Yeah, in terms of Russia, I think it's one of the more complicated questions. I think that they're relatively pragmatic. We've seen them obviously engage with the Taliban since the fall of Kabul 3+ years ago. And in many ways, I think they might look at HTS as a similar model, and therefore a country that, or a new government that they could potentially work with if they're being pragmatic to retain their interests. They want to, of course, keep a warm water port in the Mediterranean to help with all of their operations in Africa, as well as potentially harassing Europeans as well. And therefore, one of the interesting things we saw in the lead up to the offensive against the regime was that HTS put out a number of statements following November 27th, essentially saying that, while we don't agree with you doing all these airstrikes against us in the offensive, our fight really is against the regime, Iran and its Shia militia, and that we could potentially have fruitful relationships going forward if you essentially ditch the regime. And of course, we will safeguard your consular services in Aleppo, as well as any diplomatic facilities in Damascus, as well as any remaining Russian citizens that have been living in Syria. So there's clearly been some potential back channeling going on between Russia and HTS and what that could mean going forward. And at least thus far, Russia's been able to maintain its ability to have its different bases on the coast in Syria and see how that potentially plays out vis-a-vis the development of these relationships.
Well, certainly as far as the al-Assad regime, it seems that Russia and Iran were quite absent in recent times.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that the regime really was hollowed out by a decade ago, and the Russians and Iran saved them. And yet, at the same time, over this past decade, we haven't really seen the regime build up stronger institutions, make reforms so that it would be more robust and more flexible. And in fact, it's become weaker in some ways, especially considering the fact that the economy has been torn to shreds because of the economic crisis next door in Lebanon, where Syria is using a lot of its banks to continue to try and be connected to the international system, and thus creating way more inflation in the country. And because of that, due to them not necessarily reforming internally, even though the Russians and Iranians backed the regime, there were a lot of arguments. And by the time of this offensive, and the fact that it happened so quickly, and the fact that maybe there wasn't enough time to pull off a counteroffensive, both decided that we're just going to pull the cord on this and try and regroup.
Well, as happens in quite often in the region, factions are vying for power. So what are the chances of all these groups collaborating successfully to hold elections and rebuild Syria?
I mean, it's one of the biggest questions going forward. I don't know if necessarily we'll see elections in the way that one might conceive of it in the Western context. Based off of what I know, and if past is precedent, HTS will conduct sort of internal elections amongst elite males for positions within its Majlis al-Shura, the consultative council. And then from there, a prime minister will be selected, and the prime minister will essentially decide on ministers, and the Majlis al-Shura will essentially stamp the ministers. So it wouldn't necessarily be a broad process where every Syrian would have a say in these elections, but it would likely be notables and key elites within the society that would be deciding it, at least if the model in Idlib is put upon the rest of the country. The biggest question is how scalable this model is to the rest of the country, whether they'll pivot more and become a bit more open in their system than it was in Idlib, and also how they might integrate other factions into it. And I think a lot of, there's a greater chance for the potential that the SDF and HTS can cut a deal, since they aren't necessarily enemies with one another. It might be a bit more difficult with the Turkish-backed SNA, because they themselves have not been really governing directly, and also have not really been focused on building a country in the same way that both HTS and the SDF have been doing in their own spheres of influence. So that might be the toughest nut to crack related to it, especially since Turkey might want to use the SNA as a card to play for more influence in the new Syria.
Well, Aaron, as a final thought, with all these factions involved inside and outside the country, how likely is the alternative scenario of another civil war in Syria?
It's really hard to say. I can see a number of potential scenarios. It's definitely possible that we might see more continued fighting more in the northeast and eastern part of the country because of the SNA and the SDF, as well as the remnants Islamic State insurgency. But I suspect that things will be relatively stable in more of the western part of the country where HTS controls. And the biggest question is how HTS can reconcile its new polity and its building up of it with the eastern part of the country.
Aaron Zelin, thank you very much for giving us your analysis on the situation there.
Thanks for having me.
It's estimated that more than 700 journalists have been killed in Syria since 2011. So imagine you're a Syrian journalist in Damascus on the day opposition forces reach the capital and the president of a despised regime flees the country. Well, that's the situation my final guest found himself in this week. Danny Mackey managed to work around power cuts and a curfew to describe the experience. Danny Mackey, thanks for making the time, especially considering the turbulent circumstances. Let's start by getting an idea of when you knew something major was happening in the country.
Well, really, when the fall of Aleppo happened, we got a big idea that something really serious was happening. We could see that an entire province falling would lead to a number of different problems in other provinces. You know, we saw the Syrian army fled. And Assad lost basically Aleppo, Hama, Idlib, Daraa, and Suwaida in the space of around 5 days. I mean, to lose 5 of your most important provinces in 5 days is really unprecedented. That's when we kind of knew that, okay, this is heading towards Damascus. Even though Damascus and Homs fell the same evening, we expected there to be more resistance. We expected there to be a bit of a fight. But no, it was just abandoned. Syrian army just abandoned its positions. They abandoned the capital city and basically just fled for their lives. And that's something which has been a reoccurring feature over the last 2 weeks, is Syrian army just abandoning its positions.
And when did you first get a sense that the opposition forces, the Military Operations Administration, as it's called, first arrived into Damascus?
We got a sense when we heard the gunfire in the capital, and we heard that they'd arrived at the broadcasting center in Umayyad Square. Now, when they got to this center, and it was really, you know, the old school traditional head for the media building kind of coup, when they arrived there, they actually issued a statement saying, on Syrian television, saying the regime had actually collapsed. And that was really fitting for a 60-year-old regime, that it would be done in that kind of way. Also, we heard a number of, clashes. We heard reports. We could see that they were massing around the edges of the capital. And, when you've lost most of Damascus countryside and, they've actually infiltrated the center, you could see things had come to an end. But you didn't see any heavy weapons. What we saw at the start was just, militants carrying AK-47s, maximum having a couple of RPGs. We didn't see any really heavy weapons, which suggests that there wasn't a fight at all.
What's been the mood of the people on the street? Of course, we've heard reports of all the celebrations supporting the downfall of Bashar Assad. Are there any voices in support of him?
Well, absolutely not. I think Assad is, dead and buried when it comes to Syria. Even his main coastal kind of support base has pretty much abandoned him. And, why wouldn't they? This was an individual who said that, he would live, he was born in Syria and he would die in Syria. And, when push came to shove, he just upped and left the country, and he left his own security detail behind. He didn't even take them with him, which shows you, there were also reports that he emptied out the Syrian central bank. So this individual clearly had no concern for anything but his own interests. And him going to Russia, applying for refugee status at the end is, really fitting end to someone who has created so many refugees himself.
One of the big stories coming out is how many people have been freed from the prisons.
A number of different people, thousands, and all across Syria, tens of thousands have been released from the prisons, from Adra to Saydnaya to Aleppo, Hama. And many of these people really did nothing wrong, but maybe say a couple of words against the regime, maybe have some sort of, a couple of issues behind them. And some of these people stayed there for decades, especially the political prisoners. There were people who'd been in there since the start of the crisis. And, the Assad regime's prisons were really, slaughterhouses. So many of these locations to actually find, hundreds of individuals was really a blessing that you could actually see them, because for the Assad regime, this was a place where people came to die. I mean, no one went into Syrian prisons to actually come out.
We heard reports that there were actually people, a large number of people, who were scheduled to be executed on the day the regime fell. It seems they basically got a last-minute reprieve.
Yeah, I mean, for them, it was definitely a miracle. And for the rest of Syria, it's been a miracle as well, because the rest of Syria was probably expected to perish within a couple of days because of the situation in the country. I mean, and when I mean that, I mean the economic situation in the country, which you have an absolutely wrecked financial system. You have a country which, everything's getting more expensive. The salaries keep getting even lower. And, when speaking from an economic sense, an entire population was struggling, to really meet any sort of need. So this was something which the Syrians needed change. They got the change they needed. And going forward, they're going to have to handle how to challenge the many issues which are going to come towards them in the future, which will be substantial and which need many sensible heads.
And there are still reports of many people being held in secret prisons underground in bunkers and through a tunnel network. And I guess the priority is to get to them too.
Well, clearly more effort has gone into the Syrian prison system than has gone into the actual air defense system in Syria or any of the systems in the country. And I'm sure if Assad would have put all of that money into his technological capabilities, then he probably wouldn't have collapsed in that way. But what I would definitely say is, these places were not places where you'd hold one or two people. They were places where you'd hold tens of thousands of people, in a very systematic, comprehensive manner, where you'd probably keep them there for decades on end. So what we've seen from Serdnaya, especially people coming out, we've seen, women living with children, not knowing who the fathers of the children are. We've seen horrific stories. And for anyone who's actually watching, there are many people in Syria who lived under the government, who are actually supportive of the government for a period. But for many of those people, you could never speak about Serdnaya because it would earn you a one-way trip to Serdnaya itself. But looking at it now, there was nothing that most people could have done here. And in the end of the day, watching this as a Syrian, it just makes you feel that you never want to see anything similar to this happen in the country ever again.
Now, you were talking about the situation there. Of course, after the downfall of a long-reigning regime, there can often be chaos and looting and trouble on the streets. Have you seen any signs of that?
Well, so far, we've seen some counts of looting, especially on the first couple of days in areas, what I've seen around western Damascus. There were some in the east of Damascus as well. And this was mainly, kiosks, specific areas, certain government institutions. I mean, the presidential palace was looted on a number of occasions by a number of different people. I mean, you had droves of just civilians going into areas, taking out, Assad's suitcases, tables, chairs, all sorts of, anything in the palace was basically looted in the hours after the actual fall and collapse of Damascus. So we've seen that's been a widespread factor that we've seen lots of.
What's the security situation like right now? Is the public safe?
The people are generally safe. I mean, there's no clashes or any differences now on the streets, but what we are seeing is a lot of gunfire happening. Some people in Damascus, there's a curfew which starts at 4 o'clock and finishes at 5 in the morning. Also, you'd probably add that most people are still a bit concerned. They haven't all came back to their jobs, to the streets. It's a bit of a difficult situation until most families are going to give it, at least 48 hours, give it a couple of days until they start going back to their daily lives because, a lot of people don't know what to expect. It's still a very fresh kind of thing. And whenever you have a power vacuum after a regime which has been here for 60 years, a lot of different things are bound to happen. There's going to be a bit of a period of instability, especially for the first couple of days. I mean, the Assads have let no one in for the last 60 years. So, it's about time that there's a bit of a change, and that change is going to have, sacrifices. And the sacrifice for the immediate future is, the immediate security situation. That will improve definitely with time.
Now, you touched on the economic situation and how bad things have been. What's the situation going forward?
Well, definitely the rebuilding process will take a lot of time, and it needs a lot of sacrifices from regional countries especially to help Syria economically. Sanctions need to be lifted, and Syrians themselves need to really learn how to mobilize and organize themselves in a way which rebuilds the country successfully. But definitely any economic improvement would start by getting the state institutions back online, because for now there's no electricity in the country. All of the shops are really not really open again. So that's something which will have to be dealt with in the immediate future.
Now, there are reports, and we've seen pictures of large numbers of Syrians crossing the border. They're coming back into Syria from Lebanon. They're coming in from Jordan. But it seems that there are some leaving as well. What do you know about that?
Well, a lot of people are returning to the country because it's now safe again. I mean, you don't have the Assad regime. most of these people's main issues was with the Syrian mukhabarat or the Syrian state security or the Syrian president himself. So a lot of these people can actually technically come back into Syria and go to Damascus and go to Aleppo and celebrate with their Syrian brothers and sisters that the country's been liberated.
But what do they have to look forward to? Many of them are going to have to essentially rebuild their homes after decades outside the country.
Well, they have to look forward to ultimately not being, persecuted, not being sent to jail, not being, arrested by the mukhabarat as soon as they enter the country. They have to look forward to is building a new Syria, and these events are really a new dawn for the country. So ultimately, they have many things to look forward to, many beautiful things. Reviving the country, its cultural side, helping improve the economy, and bringing a lot of stability to Syria again.
Those remaining from the Assad government have said that there will be a smooth transition. What do we know about Ahmed al-Shara, also known as Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, who heads the military operations administration that is now in control?
Well, definitely, he seems like he's going to be the new Minister of Defense in Syria, and he's gone from someone who was deeply unpopular in the country to someone with a lot of popularity in a very short space of time. So it may be a bit concerning for some of the minorities in the country, but so far the activities and the behavior of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has not really given any indications that there's going to be anything negative. So potentially speaking, things look like they're going to be in a good order going forward without any specific, religious restrictions. And it seems like, especially Jilani himself, they've given us an important blueprint by their activities in Aleppo.
Well, what is the situation for the Alawites now that Bashar Assad has gone?
I mean, I've seen many statements by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and by the rebel forces suggesting that no minorities are going to be persecuted and telling them essentially to continue their lives as it was. So I could not actually say that anything will change. We've seen no evidence of this kind of persecution so far. And I'm sure if there is, people will write about it and talk about it. But for now, it seems that things are going in the positive direction.
You talked about the police and army dropping their uniforms and going into civilian clothing. What is the role of the police and the army right now? Are they even trusted?
There is no police and army at the moment. And that's the main point. I mean, you're really going to have to build a police force to build an army again with the new transitional government. And that's something which will ultimately take time. And you're going to need individuals who have history in the country to really come together and help out with that, because you need civil servants in state institutions. And that's something where you're going to have to use people who were previously in the old regime who can help keep this machine ticking, but in the positive way, so that electricity comes, so that things become, open again, so that people have confidence again.
Now, Danny, I know you specialized in Syria's relationship with Iran and with Russia, and it seems that Iran and Russia were not around much as Bashar Assad's regime was falling. Presumably they're preoccupied with their own other issues. But what is the situation with those countries going to be like now going forward?
Well, both of them have actually issued statements saying they respect the will of the Syrian people, and the authorities here have actually issued a number of statements saying that nothing will change and that they will continue to support any relations with external factors, including Russia and Iran. So this was basically been, Assad's kind of death sentence politically was, the fact that Russia and Iran didn't come back into the fold, and the fact that the opposition have reached kind of out to the Iranians and the Russians saying, look, we want relations in the future. Let's see where this goes.
Now, the fall of the Assad regime was very fast, as the world has witnessed. How long will it take for Syria to come back together again and for the people to unite?
Well, this will take a number of years. It's not going to happen overnight. And as long as the Syrian people remain on, then ultimately they will get there in the end, everyone working together.
Oh, Danny, I think we've lost you there. Are you okay?
I'm literally going to have to go.
No, totally understood. You stay safe, Danny, and thank you for making the time. Well, it's a shame we had to cut short our conversation with Danny Mackey, who's there in Damascus, witnessing and documenting firsthand the dramatic changes in Syria. But we'll no doubt have a chance to reconnect with him at some point as this story continues to develop. And that's it for this episode of the show. I'm Riz Khan. From me and the team, thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al-Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al-Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and coming up in this special edition of the programme, we take a look back at some of the highlights of the last few weeks. Hello and welcome. The US President-elect Donald Trump has picked Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. Well, Kennedy has been accused of spewing controversial claims about vaccines at the height of the COVID-19 crisis and for opposing restrictions imposed during the pandemic. Well, he continues to bear the brunt of his claims, in particular his claim that vaccines are linked to autism. Well, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. ran for president in this year's election as an independent before dropping out in August. He then endorsed Trump in exchange for a role in the Republican administration. Well, as the new lead in Trump's health department, he says, quote, all of his policies are going to be science-based with the best science that's available.
I'm going to require, and first of all, anybody who wants to take a vaccine, I'm not going to get in their way. If you want a vaccine, or if you want to vaccinate your children, those vaccines will be available. But I am going to tell the truth to Americans, and I'm going to do for the first time good science, right? When I was a kid, there were 3 vaccines. Today, there are 72, and we're going up to now, I think, 77 or 79 with the annual COVID vaccines. So, and not one of those vaccines, with the exception of the COVID vaccine, not one of those vaccines has been tested prior to licensure. So what I would do as president is I would require placebo-controlled trials, long-term safety trials that will look at efficacy, will look at safety, will look at the long-term impacts, and be able to inform Americans.
Well, let's get more now, and we can speak to Jan Halper-Hayes, who is a former member of President Trump's White House transition team. Jan, it's great to have you back with us here on Al-Arabiya News. I'd like to talk to you about these latest nominees, in particular the nominee for Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Apparently he's going to make America healthy again. How's he going to do that?
Well, it's important to look at his position. He actually wrote a book that came out a couple of years ago that exposed our FDA and the CDC and the area that Fauci runs. And people need to understand that Fauci is a eugenist. And he has had a budget that has been so huge that he has had power over any epidemiologists, any researchers all over the world. And Robert Kennedy Jr. has seen through all of that. He has looked at the number of vaccines. Our babies get 76 vaccines. It's just not necessary for that to happen. But also, what happens is the pharmaceutical companies are the ones that fund our Federal Drug Administration. So he is going to clean up a lot of the corruption that goes on and focus on our foods that don't have GMO, that don't have the pesticides. It's very exciting. He understands it so incredibly well. There couldn't be anyone better to be that Health and Human Services Secretary.
Yeah, but difficult to understand why the scientific community is so up in arms about this. I mean, I've got a list of quotes with regards to this appointment that is extremely long. I couldn't possibly read them all out. The reaction from the Democrats is fairly predictable. They say he's dangerous, unqualified and unserious. But when it comes to the scientific community, for example, Professor John Joe McFadden at University of Surrey, who says this nomination demonstrates his disregard for science, he's talking about Donald Trump here, in favour of pseudoscience, misinformation and conspiracy theories. If confirmed, the policies he advocates will be a disaster, particularly for America. I mean, there's so many people to choose from in terms of finding criticism of this appointment. You're still sure he's the right man for the job. Why?
Well, it would be good if you got Dr. Mikovits or Dr. Peter McCullough, who can give you the other side of the science. The thing is that it is really the pharmaceutical community that funds all of this and drives the amount of drugs that we take. And yes, there have been scientific studies, and some of it Robert F. Kennedy considers very valid. But the fact is that it came out in Pfizer's documents that by December 2020, they knew that the vaccine would not prevent COVID. He has done research and he has exposed these people. Now, a lot of people have been bought. You really have to factor that in. Their livelihood comes from the corporate side of it. And so, yes, they don't like what he's saying because he's bringing out the truth behind a lot of, frankly, some fake peer review articles that have allowed for things to happen.
But, I mean, when it comes to his scientific background, I mean, is he really qualified to dish out opinions about vaccines at the height of a pandemic? I mean, was that a helpful thing for him to have done when, you know, there are plenty of scientists and plenty of large pharmaceutical organizations that ultimately put a stop to the pandemic, and we've moved on from the pandemic. I mean, they didn't do such a bad job, did they?
Well, actually, the COVID-1 was created and proven and patented in 2002 by Ralph Barrick out of the University of North Carolina, proving it could infect human lungs. And the SARS-CoV-19 was just an outgrowth of that, and Fauci had funded that. But let's back up a minute. A leader doesn't necessarily have to have the competence of their team. So he can know what the issues are. He can decide on the direction. He can see through the false scientific articles and the valid ones, and he can put the right people on to do the right thing.
But his education is primarily in law. What makes him qualified to call out scientists? Well,
everyone needs to see or look up his book, where he exposed Fauci and all of these health problems. You know, someone can be an incredible researcher over 20 years of being fascinated by it and have all this information and be able to communicate about it. So if anyone wants to discredit him, they're going to have a very difficult time because his knowledge base is so huge and thorough that people will have a hard time going up against him.
Indeed. Well, his scientific credentials are perhaps what's worrying many in the scientific community. But just moving on, I mean, the comments he's made, aren't you worried that, for example, his comments on vaccines could result in greater vaccine hesitancy amongst people in the United States? And that could have real health implications for adults as well as children, and in particular for children.
Well, I think what he wants to do is pare it down to the most relevant vaccines. Why do babies need 76 vaccines?
Good question. But that's something that scientists have decided, doctors have decided. It's a relevant question. but why does it have to be RFK Jr. who has the answer?
Sorry, it makes money for the pharmaceutical companies. Look, when my kid was in daycare and someone came down with the measles, the pediatrician said, get him there, because if he gets the measles, he will become immune to it. Even Fauci has said that when people got COVID and weren't vaccinated, they became immune. We've gotten so far away from natural remedies of people survived without all of these vaccines. And I don't think that making it a big worry and giving the side to the quote unquote scientific, you need to wait, because this is going to get exposed big time.
Okay, well, let's move on to some of the things he might do whilst he's in office. He says he's going to purge the Food and Drug Administration, better known by its acronym, the FDA. Why does that need to happen?
Well, let's see. When it came to the Pfizer documents, Dr. Robert Malone, who was the inventor of the mRNA and said no one should have that in a vaccine, but Pfizer and the FDA were going to seal all the documents for 75 years. Dr. Malone went to court, we got the documents, and we were able to find what they were trying to hide. The damage to pregnant women, the number of deaths, the improper control groups to test the validity of it. So the FDA is paid by the pharmaceutical companies. And often what happens is when they leave the FDA, they go work for the pharmaceutical companies.
But the FDA has got a reputation around the world as being perhaps the most prominent reference point for regulation and for standards. And isn't there a risk that if Kennedy damages its reputation, I mean, he's damaging the entire American scientific community, isn't he?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, because just because he shows what the problems are, what they've done wrong, they're also going to be doing a lot of things right. Just because there's criticism, it doesn't mean that there won't be good things done. And he won't be, and the fact is he'll be quite right about the actions that he's taking.
So what do you think he's planning to do then, concretely, to tackle it?
Well, I think he's going to investigate exactly why they have approved certain things. He's going to start there. He's going to find out who is making money on the side. And he is going to set it up a different kind of relationship, not where the pharmaceutical companies can pay the people of the FDA, but the FDA is focused on the safety of the people of the nation.
Okay, just looking at the sort of the general appointments across the board, just more generally speaking, you know, the ones that have been announced in the last few days, a flurry of appointments for this new administration. What are your thoughts? Do any of them, I mean, do you think it's fair to say, first of all, with RFK, that he's perhaps the most controversial of all of them so far?
I think if you talk to them, they don't like the idea that Matt Gaetz is going to be the Attorney General. Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. I think putting Tulsi Gabbard in for our spy agencies was one of the best things that Trump did. The fact that Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, both very, very successful business people, are going to find a way that our government excels. It were two great appointments. He has asked the lunaticfarmer.com to be an advisor to the Agriculture Secretary so that we can bring about a better way of raising our food. He's shaking things up, things that have needed to be changed for years and years and years.
Sure. I mean, disruption seems to be a common theme with quite a lot of the people who've been announced in the last few days. But they've got to be qualified, haven't they, to do the job? And there have even been people from the Republican Party who've spoken to us on this channel and expressed serious concern about one or two of them. And you mentioned Matt Gaetz. Are you concerned about him?
Well, you have to understand how the Department of Justice has withheld or redacted documents that Congress has every right to oversee. Congress is basically each agency's boss because they set the laws and they approve things. I think Matt Gaetz, being the Attorney General, is going to dig in to the lawfare. He's going to dig into the relationship with the FBI and the CIA, and he will shake things up. He is a disruptor par excellence, and actually that's what's needed, especially after the lawfare that came out against Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, what happens next? Because when you've got people like Matt Gaetz and RFK Jr. That not everyone approves of by any stretch of the imagination, supposing they don't get confirmation from the Senate, there's something called a recess appointment, where I gather they can be sort of fast-tracked in or pushed into those positions. Just tell us a bit about how you see things unfolding.
Well, I think it's actually... we now have 53 senators. So in all probability, his picks will get confirmed. But using the recess appointments takes all of that out of it and allows people to get and do their job. I'm all for that, so that there are none of these games that go on. Look, there was someone who he wanted to be number 3 at the Department of Defense. And it turned out that 20 years before, the ex-wife had done something. And so the Democrats brought that up and rubbed it in his face. We don't need that kind of petty stuff going on.
Well, it happens on both sides of the aisle, doesn't it, when new administrations come in? And the whole point of having these great institutions is that they vet the candidates and make sure they can stand up to scrutiny. Surely that's the whole point.
Well, it is the whole point, but when we have both sides, and the Republicans aren't necessarily as petty as the Democrats, they scrutinize, but they tend to scrutinize with more facts and concerns, like when they asked the latest appointment to the Supreme Court, what is a woman? And she couldn't answer it. Well, that was very revealing to the country.
So when John Thune, the Senate Majority Leader, says all options are on the table to clear Trump's nominees, just how do you interpret that? What do you think he means by that?
Well, I don't know, because Thune doesn't really like Trump. So we might see some jockeying going on.
Okay, but just for the record, you're happy with the announcement that RFK is going to be looking after health matters for you and millions of other Americans?
Absolutely. And the thing is that people are so quick to judge instead of waiting to see the actions he's going to take. And that is what Trump has put in there. People who will take action and deal with the problems that we've been aware of for decades and find ways to solve them. And that's what people need to be focusing on.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today, Jan Halper-Hayes. Thank you very much indeed to you.
Thank you.
Well, staying with the news of the appointment of RFK Jr., we can speak now to the Executive Director of the American Public Health Association, George C. Benjamin. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I'd just like to get your thoughts, first of all. How do you feel about having an anti-vaxxer having such a public and prominent role when it comes to health matters?
You know, we actually think this is the wrong guy for the job. He doesn't have the medical training the management skills to manage such a large enterprise, the temperament, and his many of his public statements have resulted in the fact that he doesn't have people's trust to run this kind of agency.
Okay, so obviously you don't feel a huge amount of confidence, and of course you've worked already with the Trump administration during the last term. Just tell us a bit about how that relationship works. Do they often come to you and ask for advice?
Well, I've been personally in D.C. for a long time, and I've been a local health officer in this region, and so yeah, I've worked with administrations of both Democrats and Republicans. And I've been on advisory committees, and as my association, which is, the largest public health association in America, we've been around since 1872. We do advise the federal government in a variety of ways, either directly or indirectly. And we've worked with the Trump administration in the past. They've had some extraordinarily competent people to work with. We did have to work with them during COVID because, COVID was a big event, like it was everywhere else. And we had things that went real well, but we also had some things that did not go well when people who were not qualified got into the fray.
And do you imagine that you, in your capacity as Executive Director of American Public Health, you will have to work closely with RFK Jr.?
I'm going to have to work closely with the department. Obviously, the secretary has to decide who he wants to listen to, but I'm certainly going to reach out to him should he be confirmed, just because I've worked with every other secretary, and I've known every other secretary, in the department since at least 1990.
A lot of shock from the scientific community about RFK being given this role, given in particular his anti-vax stance. But when it comes to business and how he runs the department under his control, I mean, he seems to suggest there's a lot of wastage, there's a lot of corruption, and there's a need for much greater transparency. Do you think he's got a point?
Every organization can improve in its efficiency, and most of his statements are absolutely overstated. The organization has got highly competent people, and can things be improved? Absolutely. But the Food and Drug Administration, the CDC, as entities that he's specifically targeted, are terribly underfunded. If the truth be shown, and we know that they're terribly underfunded.
And he's issued this message on X telling people in the FDA, saying they're part of a corrupt system. I've got two messages for you: preserve your records and pack your bags. I mean, do you feel threatened by that?
If I was an employee, absolutely, I would feel threatened. Many of these people can make a lot more money in the private sector without the kind of threats. They enjoy what they do. They've committed to public service, and that's not the way you treat public servants.
What do you make of some of Kennedy's theories? He's got a theory, I gather, about removing fluoride from drinking water, for example. What's the science behind that, do you think?
We know that fluoride is safe and effective in the doses that are delivered. Primarily, people used to get their fluoride in their drinking water. They now can get fluoride in a variety of other ways, including toothpaste, specialized treatments when you go to the dentist's office. But I got to tell you, there are a lot of people that don't go to the dentist's office. There are a lot of people that don't drink water out of the tap. There are a lot of people that still drink water that comes out of wells. So fluoride in the drinking water and professional water systems is very important. Can you be given too much of anything? Absolutely. Anything that's therapeutic, you can get too much of. So to the extent that use of fluoride over time might change, there's no reason not to have a national conversation about it. But his theories and the way he's articulated them are not helpful to the conversation.
But clearly America does face a number of health issues, major concerns, the opioid crisis. There's obviously an issue with regards to nutrition and obesity in the United States. Don't you think it's a good thing that someone with a totally fresh perspective and a totally different set of ideas should come in and perhaps look at some of these historic problems in a different way?
Every administration has new people with new ideas and new ideas. He's not unique there. Yes, there's obesity problem, an obesity epidemic, opioid epidemic, a gun violence epidemic, a epidemic of maternal child health. Maternal mortality is high in the United States, growing STDs. Healthcare costs are going through the roof. So he's got a lot of things he's going to walk into that are going to occupy his time on day one, none of which he has any skill, expertise, or training to manage.
Okay, so you clearly don't think he's the right man for the job. But, I mean, when it comes to the FDA and looking at nutrition and what people eat in America, I mean, he does seem to have some reasonable points, doesn't he? I mean, when you look at the correlation between various health issues in the United States and the sorts of things people are eating, I mean, he's as qualified as anyone to see that there's a problem and to try and fix it, isn't he?
Well, I'd be happy to have him try to fix it. The FDA has been trying to fix the same problem he's articulating for many, many years. So if he can aid in that, great. But, you know, this is not something that he can come in by fiat and change overnight. And in fact, the very people that he's demonizing are the very people that he's going to need to help him make any changes that he's proposing. And by the way, you know, the biggest problem in America, even though I would agree, high fat, high salt, low nutritious foods are a problem, obesity certainly is a problem. You're looking at a guy who struggled to keep my weight down my whole adult life. But having said that, the biggest problem we have in America is food insecurity. That's a problem the health department needs to take on with vengeance. He can also make sure that people have in our schools nutritious lunches. And yeah, we need a champion for nutritious lunches in the schools. So if he articulates everybody having access to affordable, safe food, nutritious lunches, and kids are able to get those lunches in school that they need, that they can't get at home, we're all for it and we'll work with him on that. If he goes in and says, you people are bad and we're going to, by fiat, try to change the rules, he's going to be a failure. It's not that we're going to necessarily be the group that's opposing to him, but he won't have if he doesn't have the industry to help him do this, he won't be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I've been looking at reaction to the news of RFK Jr.'s nomination, lots of it, and it comes from all corners of the globe. I just found this from Professor Simon Wesley at King's College London. He's a professor of psychiatry, and he says, quote, that sound you just heard was my jaw dropping, hitting the floor and rolling out of the door. As someone who graduated from a Texas high school, I have a great admiration and affection for Americans. They deserve better, much better than this. Who do you think would have been a better choice than RFK Jr. as Donald Trump's pick to head up this important role?
Yeah, I'd be the one to condemn anybody that would name. But let me just say that the Republican Party has a deep, long, highly qualified bench. Just look at many of the people that were in their last administration. Several of them would be excellent secretaries. Look at people that have been in previous Republican administrations. Many of them can be excellent secretaries. This is just not the guy for the job. Had they put in someone who was properly trained, with the management skills and experience, with the temperament, and could develop the trust of the American people, we would all be for him. And by the way, we supported many of the Trump administration appointees the last time in the health department.
Yeah, I mean, some people have gone much further than the person that I just quoted there, the professor I quoted there. Others in the political realm have called RFK Jr.'s appointment dangerous, unqualified, unserious, they've said. And I'm just wondering, lastly, whether you think perhaps his appointment threatens to undermine America's position as a reference point and a center of excellence for the global scientific community.
The secretary is our ombudsman to the world, and I don't know how you take him seriously because we don't.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. George C. Benjamin, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Syria is still the world's largest refugee crisis, but now the future for Syrians could be about to change, as many people in neighbouring countries like Turkey, as well as in the UK and Germany, are talking about finally returning home. Well, from the Turkish-Syrian border, Hamad Mahmoud, a Syrian originally from Deir ez-Zor, who's been living in Turkey for the past 9 years, says he's thrilled to be finally returning home. He says he feels like a bird ready to fly.
I'm going to my country. I'm going to Syria, my country. Actually, I feel now, I didn't feel like this moment. I didn't before this time. I feel like bird, like I want to fly to sky because I'm so happy. Our country is free now.
Well, for Syrians still in Syria, the news of Assad's fall brought a wave of jubilation. Many celebrated and rejoiced. Let's take a listen to what some of them had to say.
I am out and about, and there's nothing to be afraid of. The situation in the country is good. We just hope to get the economy moving again.
This criminal, corrupt regime, Assad and his father, has brought us nothing but anger, injustice, torture, and a lack of livelihood. My father was in the Syrian army. He used to warn us that the walls have ears when we were younger. So when we asked about what was happening in Hama, or what this criminal regime was up to, he would remind us that we were being listened to, and that could lead to his execution.
At this very moment we are well and safe. The burden, depression and internal sadness have been lifted from our chests. We've been depressed ever since 1963 until now.
Well, since 2011, more than 14 million Syrians have been forced to flee their homes looking for safety. Well, more than 7.2 million Syrians are living displaced within their own country. Around 5.5 million others are living in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq and Egypt. Well, let's get more now, and we can speak to Walid Safour, who served as the first representative of the Syrian National Coalition to the UK and who is the founder and the president of the Syrian Human Rights Committee. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We just listened to some people there expressing their hopes for the future of Syria. Some people summing this up as being a hopeful but uncertain future for your country. Does that sound about right?
Of course, we are so happy and so pleased for the fall of the dictator regime. But we have a genuine apprehension about the future. And we hope that no international involvement to abolish our pleasure and our happiness. We are so happy that this regime, which deprived us from our homeland for around 45 years, to come from the window after we have been driven from the door by the Syrian youth who left Syria while they were 10 years old and returned. They are now 24 and 25 years old, and they fought with the restraint, and they were observing the instructions given to them to be good and to be very disciplined with all the people, even the enemies, even the people who tortured them. But what happened next is the crucial one for us. Now the Syrian regime, Bashar al-Assad, has fled to Russia. And Russia, I wonder, they accepted him as a refugee for humanitarian reasons. What sort of reasons for a criminal of war? Yesterday, people come out from the prisons, from Sinai prisons, from other prisons, and disastrous stories were told. Children at the age of 1 and 2 years were born in the prisons and the detention centers. People who lost their senses, their eyes, and still tens of thousands of people who were still lost in the Syrian prisons, and their families are looking for them everywhere. So what the reasons for Russia to keep this prisoner of war and this criminal to accept him as a refugee for humanitarian reason? There is no reason but to be brought to justice in Syria or before the international community if they are not safe about him in Syria.
Okay, Walid, I just want to ask you about those discoveries at the Sednaya prison. Does that go beyond your worst nightmares in terms of what you thought that the Assad regime was capable of?
I think now we are beyond the Assad regime, and we hope for a civilian rule, for civilian government, for a rule of justice, for a rule of equality, and there's no discrimination according to sect or to religion or to whatever. We are looking for democracy and all the people were alike in front of the rule of law. No one is above the other. This is what all the Syrian people are looking for at this moment, except the criminals, except those who regarded Syria as a field and farm for their own interest. This is what we are looking for now, and I think we started a new era now, and we started a new struggle for democracy and for equality and for justice, for the role of law in Syria.
Are you hopeful for this period of transition, and when do you think realistically elections could be held?
I'm very hopeful that a transition period will come forward, except if there are the anti-change will be involved with the aid of international parties. And I hope that the international community will regard and took into consideration the past 60 years of past rule and 54 years of Assad rules, the rules in black blood on their hands, and not to be involved in a dirty tricks against the Syrian people.
We've heard from Tehran. Iran says that the revolution against Bashar al-Assad was an American-Israeli plot to, quote, destabilize the Middle East and redraw its political map. They're saying that this anti-Assad sentiment wasn't in fact homegrown. It came from overseas. How do you respond to that?
What they have done from 2012, Tehran and its agencies brought from Lebanon, from Asia, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, all its militias, they contributed to the mischief of the Syrian people. They killed Syrian people. They butchered us. I'm from the city of Homs. What have they done in the city of Qusayr, in the province of Homs? They displaced all people of Al-Qusayr city, and it was occupied by what is called Hezbollah. It is the party of the Satan. This is what happened. And they come to the neighborhood one by one, and they butchered us. They killed my close relatives. They killed the husband of my nephew, my nieces. Two of them were killed, butchered, with the kitchen knife. This is what Tehran has done. It is not the other parties. The first party to be claimed for our mischief is Tehran and then Russia. They aided this criminal regime to survive for this 13 years of the Syrian upheaval and against this dictatorship of al-Assad's regime.
Are you feeling that the country is heading now in the sort of direction that you would want to actually return to Syria? Is that something you're thinking about doing yourself, along with the many millions of Syrians who live overseas?
I hope, and all the sincere Syrians who wanted the interest of their country, they hope that the country is heading towards a healthy future, towards democracy, towards equality, towards justice, towards to leave this black past of the dictatorship to reconciliation with all its components. This is what we are hope, and I've been in contact with many Syrians in the diaspora and inside Syria and in the countries around Syria where many Syrians are living. We've been in contact with them in the last few days, and all of them are hoping for a better Syria, for Syria where reconciliation was brought about among the Syrian people, all of them. We are not against anyone, only we are against those who committed crimes, who killed, who tortured, who took the decisions against the Syrian people. We are against only about these, and these are very few. Other than that, nobody is against any other body.
Okay, and just lastly, I mean, looking at the composition of Syria's new leadership, lots of different groups, lots of different ideologies and ideas for the future of Syria, and indeed some from the old guard, because the former Prime Minister Mohammed Jalali is part of the transition. Aren't you worried that such a disparate group of people could end up infighting and there'll be more chaos to come?
I think our people has learned a lot of lessons from the past, when they were apart and when they fought each other. Now all of them are looking for a better Syria, for a future where all Syrians are alike. And I think as long as all the people are heading like that, and they are trying to overcome all difficulties. I know there are a lot of difficulties in our march towards arriving the last goal and the last end. But I think we are looking for the wise people to overcome all of these with all people in order to reach it. And I hope they will not lose the last chance and come back to give a chance to counter change people in order to abolish this. I don't want to say it's a revolution. It's a change towards equality, towards democracy, towards human rights, towards justice, towards equality in Syria.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We really appreciate it. Walid Safour, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, staying with US reaction to these developments in Syria, the US President-elect Donald Trump said earlier on that the Russian President Vladimir Putin had, quote, lost all interest in Syria because of Ukraine. Well, he also praised Israel's fighting success, he said, adding that Russia and Iran are now in a weakened state. Well, for more analysis, we can speak now to Simone Ledeen, who is a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Middle East Policy. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. This has been described as one of the biggest turning points for the Middle East in generations. Of course, I'm talking about the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Do you agree with that?
I do, yes. This is a tectonic plate level shift in the Middle East, and I think anyone who wants to draw any conclusions at this point is quite premature. I think we're all watching it play out in front of us without a clear idea of exactly where this shift will stop.
Do you think it's likely that Washington is engaging with Syria's new leaders?
I believe, according to the media reports that I've seen and what I'm hearing from folks in my network, they are working to engage with them. I hope at the same time they're also engaging, and I believe they are with Turkey, as Turkey plays a large role in influencing these groups as well.
Yeah, I mean, the group in particular that we've been talking most about is, of course, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or as it's known as HTS. I mean, there are concerns about them, not least because they are former affiliates of al-Qaeda. But do you think they really have changed their spots?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and I don't believe that we can draw any conclusions based on promises. I think the international community needs to be monitoring their activities to see and assert for ourselves if HTS has indeed changed its spots. I think time will tell. I certainly wouldn't want to be premature, though, in making these assumptions or stating categorically one way or another that a group with such a long history and such a close affiliation with al-Qaeda indeed has sort of left that organization. I think another important point is the congratulatory messages to HTS from extremist groups across the world. I think that's also very telling and should be included in any clear-headed evaluation of what HTS is today and what their plans for the future might be.
Yeah, and how do you rate the chances of all these different factions in Syria of working together? Do you think they're going to be able to, or do you think it's just a matter of time before they start fighting each other?
I think a more realistic approach to this might be a broad realization that the country of Syria, as we've known it to this point, doesn't really exist anymore, and that it might be more beneficial to consider different regional areas that are governed by different groups. I think that might be more practical and might lead to a more sort of sustained peace rather than these very disparate groups with, frankly, different goals for them to try to work together. I'm not sure that's a realistic approach, frankly.
Okay, so you think there's a likelihood of Syria, as we know it, being divided. We know that Donald Trump has sent his future Middle East advisor, Masad Boulos, to the region. He arrived during the course of the weekend. He's discussing the situation. I mean, how do you see the Trump administration shaping developments in this region?
Well, first and foremost, I would point out President Trump's very public, President-elect Trump's very public social media post saying, we must stay out of this. There's no U.S. interest in this right now. I believe what he meant was, and this was still at a time when the Assad regime had not formally fallen, although I think it was clear it was going to. I think in that context, Trump was stating clearly, we have no interest in this. There's no American interest here. I think now, as we're looking at the future of the region and specifically Syria and all of the different international players who are involved in Syria, there certainly is a U.S. interest there. And so it is gratifying to see that one of his top advisors is already making moves in the region, I think it really only will benefit us in the long run. And it's so clear now, with a little over a month to go before President Trump takes office, that he's already starting to make his moves and to assert what his new administration will be promoting. And I personally very much look forward to that.
Okay, I mean, obviously, one of the things that President Trump has said is that this has been damaging for Iran and Russia. I mean, they are, of course, two countries that have exerted considerable influence over Syria. I mean, just how damaging do you think the fall of Bashar al-Assad has been for those two countries?
I think it's been, particularly for Iran, it's been absolutely devastating. I think for Russia, it remains to be seen. I saw reports leading up to this program that Russia intends to maintain its forces in Syria. So we'll see, Tartus in particular, we'll see how that plays out. And if they're able to do that, and if HTS and its allies will fight that or not. But I do think with respect to Iran, it showed how devastated, in particular, Hezbollah has been by the Israeli defensive attacks against Hezbollah. And they've completely decapitated not only the leadership, but also the significant weapon stockpiles that Hezbollah has been building for decades now. So they were completely incapable of acting, incapable of defending Assad, who allowed them to continue to move weapons between Iran and the border with Israel for all of these years. So Iran is effectively defanged. If they were going to make a move, they would have. They just can't. So I think this has been devastating for Iran. And certainly Erdogan in Turkey saw the opportunity, saw how defanged the Iranian regime is, and therefore with the groups that he's been supporting, made his move. And that's what we're seeing play out now.
You mentioned those weapons stockpiles across Syria. There are also some pretty dangerous weapons. I mean, obviously all weapons are dangerous, but I'm talking in particular about the possibility of there being chemical weapons amongst them. Do you think that's likely?
Unfortunately, yes, I do think that's likely, and in violation as well of an earlier agreement that was made with Russia, who had promised to make sure that Syria got rid of the stockpiles that it had of chemical weapons and did not begin producing new chemical weapons. So that's an important question that I think that we should all be looking at and questioning as the international community. But yes, it is incredibly concerning that these weapons might still exist and be in Syria, and worst case scenario, fall into the hands of people who would want to use them, especially against innocent civilians. So I hope there's a serious effort underway. I know President Biden made a comment about it, but chemical weapons, I think for those of us who have any experience in that world, incredibly concerning because they're so easy to hide, to move. Obviously, there are protocols that are needed to protect the carrier from actually, getting caught up and misusing them or mishandling them. But at the same time, we need to make sure that they're destroyed or that they're protected. The stockpiles are destroyed in a safe manner. And so, yes, I'm very concerned about that. And I think the international community would be as well.
Bashar al-Assad has been granted asylum in Moscow, we understand. He's presumably not going to have much to do now that he doesn't have a country to run. He had a sophisticated PR machine working on his behalf in Damascus. In particular, they succeeded in confusing journalists and confusing the world about the realities on the ground in Syria. What needs to be done to ensure that Bashar al-Assad and that PR machine don't carry on from a distance, trying to confuse and divide the country of Syria as it undergoes this new transition?
I think that's a very interesting question. The best thing that I believe that we all can do is to highlight and call out the propaganda and the lies where we see them. As you pointed out, a lot of the propaganda that has been disseminated has been proven to be false, and that is a great place to start. I think the credibility of the organizations that propagated this has been drastically undermined, and so I think it's important as we move forward to point out how indeed this has been propaganda and how perhaps some of us were fooled in the past, but now we see the reality on the ground of what has happened and what is happening in the future. And I think with Bashar al-Assad now in Moscow and out of Syria and without access to a lot of the institutions that he was using to do this, I think it will be much more clear moving forward.
Okay, and just lastly, Simone, I mean, we've all been looking at these developments in Syria with disbelief. I've been covering the story for 13 years. You've probably been covering it for a similar amount of time, obviously with a different hat on. But what's really stood out for you out of all the images that we've seen coming out of Syria these last 48 hours or so? What's really struck you the most?
I think above all, the images out of Sednaya prison, where there appear to still be people who are trapped inside the prison, and they're trying to figure out how to get them out. They're actually images that recall to me images from World War II and the liberation of the concentration camps and the faces of the people who were liberated. It's incredibly just emotional, really hard to put into words the suffering of those people, and the fact that they're getting freed now. I think there's a lot of reason to feel apprehension about the future. Very real reasons too, but I think also important to take a moment to celebrate the release of these people, many of whom were political prisoners who their crimes were minor compared to what they've suffered since. And so to me, these are really the most powerful images so far. And I hope I hope for Syria, for the Syrian people, a new day and an opportunity for self-determination and in a positive direction and a peaceful direction. And I think the international community hopes that for them as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Simone Ledeen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now we're going to turn our attention to the journalists who have documented the turmoil in Syria over the years. Well, our special guest today is the renowned war photographer Paul Conroy, who gave us a front row view of the Syria civil war in 2012 through his camera lens. Well, Paul is with us today to reflect on the fall of Bashar al-Assad more than 13 years after the Syrian government severely injured him and killed his colleague, the veteran Sunday Times reporter Marie Colvin, and the French photographer Remy Ochlik. This in Baba Amr, on the edge of the Syrian city of Homs. Paul, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Many of us have been taken by surprise at events in Syria, especially the speed at which they unfolded the last few days. What's been your reaction to what's happened there during the last 10 days or so?
Equally as surprised, I think. Everyone who's been involved in Syria, a reporter from there, was watching with interest because of Russia's situation and Hezbollah's situation, the Iranian issues with Israel. But I don't think any of us really saw this coming and happening so fast. I'm in Odessa at the moment, and I'm kind of going through 4-hourly power cuts. And over the last few days, it seemed like every time I got back online to get more information, another city had fallen. So I'm as astonished, but I'm as pleased as anyone can be. You know, for the Syrians, after 54 years Assad family rule to have that, throw that yoke off. I can't really put it into words how happy I am for them.
And as you watched these developments unfold and you saw the opposition forces making progress in Aleppo, then in Hama, then in Homs, did you find yourself having to manage your own expectations in case this was another false start?
Absolutely. You know, we've seen over the years, you know, rebel events. I think it was 2016, 17. It looked like the regime may fall, and then the Russians stepped in particularly with their air force, and managed to push back the tide. So yeah, it's certainly in the early days. You know, Aleppo going was a huge shock. You know, it was like, wow, that is a major gain. And I kind of thought that maybe they'd consolidate their positions in Aleppo, and then it would be a grinding push down the road, you know, quite savage. But then, you know, we saw them kind of almost get Aleppo and then immediately move on to Hama. And as they advanced, your expectations and hopes grew. But there was also a part saying, be careful, you know, we didn't know if the regime were going to make a big stand at Hama. But then Hama went, and then Homs, you know, which is of particular interest to me. Homs became the focus. And that's when that's when the nerves really kicked in because of mine and Maria's connection to Homs and what happened there. And then, you know, Homs, and then almost immediately Damascus. You know, it was I won't say comical, but I was just, what? You know, because I'd come out of a blackout and check my phone again and go, oh, Hama's gone on the road to Homs. Stunning.
Extraordinary events, as you say. Let's cast our eye back to the 22nd of February 2012 and stay in Homs. Just tell us what happened on that day.
Well, the previous day to the 22nd, the situation had gotten so bad. A lot of the people who'd taken us in had been killed. A lot of the FSA guys who got us into Homs have been killed. And the media centre workers, the journalists and the activists who were reporting from this one media centre we were based in, you know, every time they went out, someone seemed to get killed. So it reached its peak of shelling, just 24-hour-a-day shelling. And that day, me and Maria had the conversation, and I said, I really don't see how we're going to be able to file another piece. You know, I think we've overcooked things. So let's do some TV interviews. Let's, you know, show the world what's happening now. We had access to a satellite link. So we did interviews with the BBC, Channel 4, and then finally with Anderson Cooper on CNN. And that was about midnight, and Marie told a story of a tiny baby who died from shrapnel wounds to the stomach. We kind of went to lay down in the back room, small back room, the media centre, with the intention of getting up and going back to the field hospital the next day. But about 6 a.m., two huge explosions rocked the building, which woke everyone up. Everyone was asleep on the floor. There were about 20 people in there. And then, say, 30 seconds later, another 2 shells landed. And at this point, I was ex-artillery, British artillery, so I understood fire patterns and what was happening. And they were walking shells into the media centre, towards the media centre. 30 seconds later, what I expected to happen happened. Something hit the back of the building, and then something hit the top of the building, and there was just chaos at that point. And then I think it was the third shell. Marie and Remy Oshlik, a French photographer, were making for the door. And they got just by the door, and the shell landed just outside and killed them instantly. I didn't fall over, but something had hit me, and I kind of checked myself and put my hand on my leg, and my hand just went straight through my leg and came out the other side. And I knew my tourniquet had been blown up as well, all the medical kit. So I just wrapped a scarf around and made a makeshift tourniquet. And then they kept shelling for about another 15 minutes then. And eventually they grabbed me from in the rubble, pulled me back inside the building because the front of the building had gone at this point. And then they took me, and threw me in the back of a truck and took me to the field hospital where Dr. Mohammed, an amazing doctor who'd stayed in homes to treat people, he kind of patched me up and got me stabilized.
I mean, it's an incredibly traumatic experience that you went through, an extremely tragic one as well, because you lost, as you said, colleagues of yours that you work with, notably Marie Colvin. And it sounds from what you're saying as well, like you feel like you were specifically targeted by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Why do you think you wanted to do that?
I think it was a simple case of kill the messenger. The message we got out in our pieces for the Sunday Times, and also on them interviews, was a tale of slaughter. They were just slaughtering. The only people in that neighborhood, really, there were a few free Syrian army, but it was mostly civilians. What we were seeing was civilians being ripped to pieces by Assad's artillery, and we were getting that message out from the spot, which I think offended them. And I could tell, just by the fire pattern, most of the artillery attacks in Bab al-Amr at that point, they would just rather lazily shell the neighborhood. But when that attack started, there was very precise artillery work. It was professional. They did the 2 location shots. We suspect they had a drone overhead adjusting the fire. And just by the nature of the attack, I always said it was targeted. And then subsequently, Marie's sister Kat worked for many years, we all did, on gathering evidence. And we eventually found a paper trail back to the regime, back to the people who planned the attack, what they got in return, cars, money. And Kat won a case in the American courts where the judge said specifically Marie was assassinated for her journalism.
Bashar al-Assad, therefore, the person at the pinnacle of the organisation, the regime that tried to kill you and succeeded in killing many others, notably, as we've been saying, Marie Colvin. He's now in Russia. He's been given asylum there. What would you like to see happen to him?
I think, one of the biggest things that myself and every Syrian could possibly want is some form of accountability. We hoped, but we knew it was a bit of a faint hope that he would, he's not the kind of character who would do a last stand in Damascus. The odds were always on that he'd escape. But of course, with hopefully with more evidence gathered once they get into the government buildings, and certainly the Muhakhbarat and the secret services, there's a lot of evidence out there. In an ideal world, international arrest warrants, and then in a perfect world, see him in a dock. I think that would be the biggest gift to the Syrian people, for justice to be seen to be done.
Let's talk a little bit more about Marie Colvin. You had a really close working relationship with her. She had a really formidable reputation, didn't she? Because she lost an eye during a grenade attack in Sri Lanka in 2001, hence the eye patch that was sort of so iconic, a signature sort of feature when you think about her. Just tell us, what was she like?
She was quite amazing. I mean, I met her in Syria, ironically, about in 2003, and she was just this. I just tried to break into Iraq by making my own boat, and she found out about this. I got captured and arrested and eventually released, but she found out about this, and I was just, first time I met her, I was sat in a bar at the hotel in Syria, and she just came in. She just stood there silhouetted by the door, really cinematic entrance. And she was just stood there and went, "Who and where is the boatman?" And I kind of, into me, and she just walked up and she went, "Marie Colvin, Sunday Times, can I buy you a whiskey?" And I was like, "Yes, you can." But she was a force of nature, and I loved what we did. Marie and her journalism was very much people focused, and focused on the people who more often than not have the least say in any war situation, which is women and children. So that was always our focus when we worked together. She really, you know, there are experts who talk about the military situation and the weapons being used, and that is a form of journalism. Marie was very much get me to the families, get me to the people, and that's, you know, that's why we were in Baba Amra. That's why we were in that part of Homs, because there were 25,000 women and kids there, and that's what she wanted, and pretty much nothing would stop her. You know, we crawled through a three-mile long sewer tunnel to get into Homs. That was how dedicated she was to the story. Force of nature.
Yeah, I mean, a force of nature is how you describe her. Other people who worked with her said, you know, she was not necessarily always the easiest person to work with, and that was also probably by her own admission as well. But it sounds like you really managed to hit it off.
She used to give people the slip quite often. If it wasn't working, the foreign desk would get a call saying, "I've lost her, she's gone," and she'd send them one way and she'd go the other way. So yeah, it was a relief that we got on so well, you know, because we spent a lot of time in situations like that, and we had the same dark humour, which helped.
What do you think she'd make of what's happened in Syria these last few days?
I think I wouldn't be sitting in Odessa if Marie was with us now. I would be long ago on the way there. I think it would be bittersweet. Of course, she would be elated to see the Syrian people taste freedom. I think the bitter part of it would be seeing Assad slope off to Russia. You know, that would grate on her nerves.
You say that Bashar al-Assad tried to silence the media, tried to silence you. He failed to silence you. But one of the techniques he used was he had this team of propagandists who peddled a very different narrative about what was happening in Syria. Some of them were foreign. One was British, notably, another Canadian. They're still at it, actually. I've been looking at their Twitter feeds. But how effective do you think they were in distorting people's understanding of the civil war in Syria?
I think they were actually quite effective. And then, you know, can I name them? Because I know exactly who you're talking about. You know, Vanessa Beeley and Eve Bartlett and a couple of others really did pump out this pro-regime message. And as I always said, their objective was not to convince anyone of anything in particular. It was just to muddy the waters so much that people didn't know what was true. You know, and that's we have a burden of proof as journalists. We have to, you know, stand by it, verify it, and you know, put your name to that. With these people who really, really did go full regime, their only job was to muddy the waters. And I used to get people back home who knew my history with Syria, who would say to me things like, "Are the white helmets jihadists?" And I would be annoyed, but I would be like, why do you even think that? You know, I've told you 1,000 times, you know, no. But these people did muddy the waters so much without any burden of proof. It would just keep pumping this river of bilge onto the internet, into the newspapers, and it was successful. I think, you know, it's been tried again here in Russia, and I don't think it's been as successful. I think people have seen through that now, but you know, the fact that they're still at it, I was looking at some of the things that she's been writing lately, and just astonishing how far they will go in the name of a bad cause.
Indeed. We've got to let you go fairly soon. Just lastly, I want to ask you, you know, obviously events of 2012 are going to be with you for the rest of your life. Seems like you're going to carry on having really strong links with Syria moving forwards. Are you optimistic about the country's future?
I am actually, and I'll tell you, I know there's a lot of people going, "Oh, what happens now?" Yeah, what everyone has to remember is the Syrian people have had 54 years of brutal dictatorial rule. When they had the uprising in 2011-12, they were not standing there in Homs, in all of the major cities, calling for any form of draconian Sharia law. They were out there protesting. They wanted, a liberation of the constitution, more rights to vote. They weren't after that. And I think if anyone comes in now, and I think, the HTS have seen, they tried in Idlib with the hard line. It didn't work. The Syrian people didn't want it. And I think anyone who now tries to force upon the Syrian people another form of draconian hardline law will be given short shrift. I just don't think they will manage it. I think they need all the help they can get to make a democracy happen. But, it does involve letting the Syrians now decide their future. And, it's been plagued by foreign powers, with, certainly Hezbollah, Iran and Russia have been very bad for Syria. I think now the Syrians will decide, and they won't have it forced upon them. They know how to resist this now. It won't happen again.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Photojournalist Paul Conroy, thank you for your time.
Yes.
Now, turning our attention to the United States, where local and federal authorities are attempting to reassure the public as multiple drone sightings on the East Coast have been raising security concerns and fueling conspiracy theories. Well, in a televised statement, the US President-elect Donald Trump has urged the US military to inform the public about what's going on.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense. I can't imagine it's the enemy, because if it was the enemy, they'd blast it out. Even if they were late, they'd blast it. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should, because the people are really, they happen to be over Bedminster. Want to know the truth? They're very close to Bedminster. I think maybe I won't spend the weekend in Bedminster. I've decided to cancel my trip.
The US President-elect Donald Trump speaking there, while responding to the reported drone sightings. The Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Aviation Authority, and the Department of Defense released a joint statement saying that the FBI has received more than 5,000 tip-offs, from which 100 leads have been generated. Well, advanced tech and expert visual observers have been reportedly sent to the region. Well, the agencies report that the sightings are a combination of lawful, commercial, hobbyist and law enforcement drones, as well as mistaken identifications of aircraft, helicopters and stars. Well, the authorities are reiterating that the drone activity to date does not pose a national security or public safety risk. Well, as the number of sightings continues to grow, some elected officials and mayors are left with little to no information to share with their constituents. Local authorities are reportedly uninformed, while a lack of answers from federal officials has left many frustrated. Well, from the Mine Hill Township in New Jersey, where there have been multiple drone sightings, I'm joined now by the mayor, Sam Morris. Thank you so much for joining us, Mayor Morris. For our viewers who don't know much about Mine Hill Township, it's in Morris County, New Jersey, got a population of around 4,000. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But tell me, what's the mood there like now?
The mood is unsettled. It's since this started a month ago, the mood has been, there are people who are very blasé about it. Not everyone is upset and very stressed, but, there are also a lot of residents who are very distressed about it. They're very upset. It's causing emotional concerns for them. People do not like unknown things flying over their head. You know, we understand we have a regulated airspace in this country, you know, all countries. You know, we understand planes are up and that planes can crash and things like that. But it's the unknown that makes you very uncomfortable. And that's what has people concerned right now.
Yeah, and you yourself have been out with your camera or your smartphone, I don't know which, doing some filming. We can look at some of the pictures you've filmed. There is your own video footage. I mean, as you've filmed what we're looking at now on our screens, and we're looking at what appears to be a football pitch with some lights. I mean, they are hard to show on television, I have to admit, but they are there. We can see them. I mean, what was going through your head as you filmed that?
Shock and surprise. I was notified that evening by a resident that lived right. That was over our municipal complex, where our school and our town hall and fields and else are. And I was notified by a resident that there were drones over the area, and I came around here and shot that footage myself. It was, you know, took a minute to get oriented, but, you know, you're watching the way they're moving, you're watching them, that they're stationary. That same evening, my wife had a drone go over her car, which she was very uncomfortable about. She called me very upset. But it's you know, while you take people seriously and you take people, you know, you give people the benefit of the doubt until you see it for your own eyes and you see it in the way that I filmed it. There's always a little doubt in there, but now, you know, it removes all doubt.
Yeah, I mean, you've just raised some really important points. First of all, I'm just wondering how large these objects are that are flying around in the skies above where you live. And just tell us a bit more about, if you don't mind, what happened to your wife?
Well, people are reporting various sizes, but the ones that they get more attention they're larger. I know I can tell you the one that my wife saw. She thought it was size of her car hood. Now, a commercial drone, are known to be that size. You know, they could be 3 or 4 feet square, or, you know, a meter and a half square. But some people are reporting these things to be as big as a pickup truck or bigger. And that is, to have that over your head and not know what it is and not know if it's regulated and not know if it's friend or foe, that's a very concerning thing.
Yeah, I imagine a lot of people in the area have got their telescopes out trying to get a closer view of what these things are, because just a bright light on its own doesn't offer enough information. I mean, you hearing a similar sense of frustration and anxiety, really, from your fellow mayors in other parts of New Jersey and other parts of the United States?
Yeah, this all started, to go back to one point, it's not the bright light, it's the movement. These drones have been working in a grid pattern. They go over an area and they go left and right, or north and south, or east and west, and they go in a pattern that you can see is programmed. It's not like, well, they just zip around and go in, any pattern. They have very specific scanning, it looks like they're doing. And that's what has people, that's what the biggest thing that upsets people. Sunday, week ago in the morning, I'm in a group of mayors in my county that we all kind of confer with each other on various issues and things that are going on. And we all decided to do a press release in the morning, and we decided to release a letter to our state's Governor Murphy that evening, just trying to stir things up to get somebody to talk to us. Within a couple of days, the state police had set a meeting with mayors. There were 250 mayors there. And since then, it's been a very active give and take, but not with a lot of detail or information, which is very disappointing.
Is this entirely new? Or, I mean, had you ever noticed anything like this before in the skies above your town? And do you think the fact that everyone's talking about it means everyone's looking at the sky and perhaps they're sort of paying more attention to what's flying around above them?
I think it's fair to say that 60–70% of these sightings are planes. We have several, it's New York Metro, we're an hour west. We have landing, pathways for Newark Airport, the New York City airports, other regional airports. But here's the thing, those are very definable. You can look to a certain point in the sky and see every minute and a half an airplane going into Newark International Airport. And you know what they are. It's a 737 descending to 2,000 feet, making approach, or the other airports. We all get that. We see those patterns. We understand that. But these are, when these things work in a grid pattern, or they seem to be programmed to go in certain directions for a length of time and turn back around or hover. Last Wednesday night, the night after I filmed, last Wednesday night, a week ago, not 2 weeks ago, I saw and filmed, but it didn't come out well, a drone that was hovering. And the drones have a red and a green light. One side is their left side, one side is their right side. And I saw a drone sitting and spinning. You could see the red and green lights alternating. But my video didn't come out very well, so it's not very usable. So those are the things that make people realize these are not airplane patterns.
Indeed, and people in your part of the United States know all about aeroplanes because, as you said yourself, you're near lots of airports. You're 50 kilometers from Newark, about the same distance from Central Jersey Airport. I mean, given that you do have these airports nearby, I'm wondering if you've got any other sites or targets in your area that might be the reason, the motivation for some drone surveillance going on above your heads there. I mean, are there some sensitive sites around there? There's Picatinny Arsenal, which is a weapons development center about 3 kilometers from where I'm sitting right now. They had flyovers. They put a press release that they had unidentified flyovers. There's other military installations here, but there are military installations everywhere. The one very strong question that's been asked for the last month is why New Jersey? It's a densely populated state. And the other thing, too, that I wanted to share with your viewers, these drones are not hiding. They come out about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Daylight savings here, it's dark by 5. And they're out generally till 10 or 11 p.m., and they are very obvious. They're obviously obvious. Now, there are reports that, and I did see one myself one morning, I couldn't get my camera up ready, that they do go till daylight now, some of them. But why New Jersey and why are they being so obvious in the evening has been the two big questions that everyone's asking. Indeed. Before we crossed here, we heard the President-elect Donald Trump speaking. He's obviously got a property in New Jersey, in Bedminster, says he's probably not going to go there. He's also suggested that the US government is keeping Americans in the dark about these sightings. I mean, do you feel like you're being kept in the dark?
100%. I can tell you, after that White House briefing yesterday, the group of mayors that we text with, we have a texting group, frustration was over the top, why did they even take up our time? We got 2 hours notice for the meeting. The meeting started late. 3 mayors got to ask questions, and then they said, oh, we're out of time. It was incredibly frustrating. And look, and this is the other thing, look, the average citizen here, the average person here, the average person around the world knows that the government does things on our behalf that they're not going to tell us, for security reasons, for military reasons, for safety reasons. Our police departments do things, and we don't know what's going on because they don't want us to, because it's not in the benefit of public policy. But what we're hoping for is that the FBI or somebody would level with us and say, look, we know what some of these are, and unfortunately, we're not going to tell you because for security reasons, right? And people can live with that. But it's the unregulated concept. We don't know what they are. We don't really think you're seeing anything. That is where it's incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and all the while, and in the absence of concrete information, people are filling the void with conspiracy theories, some pretty outlandish ideas out there. Let me put one to you, perhaps not so outlandish, that someone here has tapped into a sense of anxiety nationwide. The country just had a very tense presidential election. There are a lot of drones whizzing around in America. I gather there are about 1 million registered drones. We don't know how many unregistered drones there are. Do you think someone's just cottoned on to the fact they've attracted a lot of attention? The media is watching. Here we are in the Middle East talking to you about it, and they just want to keep it going. This is their moment of glory, and they're having fun at the expense of the United States population.
Yeah,
what do you make of that?
The hobbyist, we'll call it the hobbyist drone community. I've spoken to people in that community. They find this this is anti-recreational drone use. They know that this actually could work very hard against their hobby and against this thing that they love, because if it leads to tighter regulation, if it leads to more rules, they're actually working against themselves. To kind of relate it into the president-elect's comments, there is something going on. It may not be to the extent. I mean, I personally know people have called me and said, "There's a drone out there. Go look." I go outside and I'm like, "Ma'am, it's a plane going into Newark Airport." The lady the other night was only because of her anxiety level, not because she's not a good person. "Mayor, there's a drone right by the moon." I went out and looked and was like, "I think that's Venus." And she texted after she calmed down. She's like, "You know what? I think you're right. And I'm sorry." But that's what it's doing to people. Having something over your head unidentified is stressing people out. And the way that it started here, it started at near President Trump's golf course and home over there. Then it moved to the Morris County area, Picatinny, Morristown Airport. They were all over the place a month ago, 3 weeks ago. And now they're kind of dissipating and moving to other parts of this region. They're moving over the Delmarva Peninsula, Delaware, Maryland. South Jersey has got a lot now. So it's not something that's just, do I think a few hobbyists have jumped in? Yeah, they're probably having a little fun, but there's still real legitimate drone activity up there that's unexplained.
Sure, and I'm going to let you go, Mayor Morris, but just to wrap it up, I mean, you mentioned anxiety. Clearly there's a lot of fear. Do you think mass panic is an exaggeration in terms of the mood right now?
I wouldn't use the word panic. I would just use that anxiety, fear, people are upset. To me, panic would be something where people are going to take action. They're going to get in their car and go somewhere or something like that. I just think it's making people anxious. And there are other people it's not bothering at all. That's the truth, too.
Okay.
But generally, and it's not something people are getting used to. It's not getting easier with time. It's still staying pretty much in the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
Okay. Mayor Sam Morris in Mine Hill Township, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this special edition of Global News Today. Thanks for watching, and wherever you are in the world, if you're celebrating Christmas, we wish you all the very best.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.